People who work at remote places, like forest officers, oil rig workers. What creepy things have you noticed while at work? I do a lot of stream work, so I spend time out in pretty rural areas walking streams and rivers. Once my coworker and I were working in a more urban environment and came across what we initially thought was a body, which of course triggered the "oh god" from us, but it ended up being a firefighter's dummy that had fallen down a hill. We felt pretty dumb. Other notable things include a small grave in the middle of nowhere for someone's dog, which was kinda sad, and a stuffed rabbit with shotty shells placed where its eyes should be, a mannequin very purposefully placed in a chair in the middle of the wood, and lots of little random altars. I also did work in Myrtle Beach, which was a hellhole, and accidentally walked into an inhabited homeless camp. I was peering into a stormwater grate when I looked up and saw a homeless person standing in his shelter, staring at us and saying nothing. I felt like I was trespassing, so we quietly left. I worked at a public forest. One day we had someone report a dead animal on the side of one of our trails. A few of us from the front desk hiked out to see what it was. It looked like a giant piece of liver, maybe? Just a pile of smooth red meat. No blood around. And it was wrapped up in a t-shirt with some coins scattered around it. We called our rangers to go check it out, and one of them was pretty sure it was placenta. The weird part is, you have to check in through a front desk, so someone either snuck a placenta or liver in, or gave live birth or removed an organ on our trails. We never got an answer on what that pile of meat was, how it got there, or why. I work on North Sea oil rigs on an ad hoc basis off the coast of Scotland. I wouldn't say anything was particularly paranormally creepy, but it can be a very unsettling and weird place. Fog can come rolling in out of nowhere, and other rigs you can see off the sides can disappear in front of your eyes. Sometimes you can't see the walkways 6 feet in front of you, or if you're walking over the grating, you can't see the sea below your feet. It's only about 60 meters down from deck to sea, but you can hear it, all of it muffled. The fog can roll in over the course of a few minutes too, so a perfectly clear day becomes pea soup. You can also feel the rig moving and swaying on the high winds and rough seas, even though it's a fixed-leg platform. Very unnerving to feel your office swaying when it shouldn't be. My last trip was my first ever night shift, and I found it particularly unsettling, as you got the background noise of the plant, but I walked around the whole rig without seeing another living soul for the whole shift. Usually there's about 130 people on board, although smaller rigs have smaller headcounts. Usually, once a trip, I'm hit by this awareness that you're just very isolated and in the middle of nowhere. Most rigs I've worked on are an hour's chopper ride from land, so if things go wrong, it can escalate very quickly. Yeah, I've thought about a lot of these sorts of jobs where you get paid a lot more because of the remoteness, loneliness, and the fact that in the very unlikely event of an emergency, you're probably screwed. Still, I have the first two already, so maybe a little danger would spice up my life. My college was located away from major cities, and the woods were all around us. That being said, there was a highly rated trail, the Loyal Sock Trail, which was about an hour drive from the university. I invited a friend to come with me as he'd never been on an extended backpacking trip, a more than 50-mile trail that we intended to backpack over the 4-day weekend. I'm an Eagle Scout who spent countless hours in the woods and went on backpacking trips consistently throughout my college experience. As many have said before, you get used to the minor spooky things happening, coyote howls, raccoons in the middle of the night, even the occasional unknown noise. The scariest thing to find in the woods, however, are people. We were about 20 miles into the trail, and being in Pennsylvania where the underbrush and trees line the trails pretty densely, I always walk about 100 meters off the trail to reduce the chances of me disturbing people or people disturbing me, especially in the early morning when I choose to sleep in. Following that same strategy, my friend and I go out of our way to be in this amazing spot a good ways off the trail, where it would even be difficult to see our flashlights from the trail. This spot was on a peninsula where a creek met a river, meaning there was only one way into our camp and only one way out. We start a fire, cook our food, and drink some, but not enough to get either of us drunk. We put the fire out at about midnight and head into our individual tents. All is quiet. It's the fall semester, so the leaves are on the ground, and the moon is brightly shining through the bare trees, and the air is cool. The only noise is the occasional time where I'd hear my friend turn over in his sleep, and then I hear the voices. The voices sounded very close for being on the trail 100 meters away. I checked my watch. It was 3 a.m. Who hikes at 3 a.m.? We were 20 miles in. I slowly got out of my sleeping bag, unzipped my tent, only to see my friend peeking out of his tent in the exact same fashion. He quickly moves his finger over his mouth in an exaggerated hush signal, and then used the same hand to frantically motion towards the way of the trail. Then we see them. 4 adults, 3 men and 1 woman, walking directly towards our camp. No lights illuminating their path. They're walking silently at this point. Only one of them has a backpack, an impossibility for the long hike they're a third of the way through. Being a long trip, you bring woodcutting supplies to chop branches into smaller branches to burn. For me, this was a survival knife. Grabbing the knife, believing it's my only way of defending myself, I'm more disheveled than I've ever been, especially knowing that a knife is barely a defense at all. These people walk into our site, sit down by our extinguished fire pit, and just sit there for what feels like an eternity. My friend speaks up and asks what they're doing in our campsite. Without answering the question, they ask if we have any food. Having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip, we had only then a few extra Mountain House MRE-style meals. I grab one out of my bag and toss it to one of the men. In rapid succession, I ask why they aren't using a light, if they need help finding the trail, and why they are hiking so late. They respond with the following: "We don't use lights, we know where the trail is, and it's better to hike late at night." Unnerved at this point, my friend asks them to leave. They respond by asking if we want to light the fire and hang out for a bit. No, we don't. They grab their bag, get up, and leave without speaking another word. We watch them leave and take shifts making sure that they didn't come back. Needless to say, we both got very little sleep that night. When the sun rose the next morning, we finally got some real shut-eye. By the afternoon when we woke up, it all felt like a weird dream of sorts. The only evidence was a fuzzy cap that they must have dropped that I have to this day. I've never had something as weird or spooky as that happen in the woods, and I hope to never have it happen again. In the 8 years since that trip, I haven't been back to the Loyal Sock Trail. I have a bunch of friends that love to do mushrooms. This definitely sounds like something they'd do. I used to be a supervisor for a janitorial company, and a couple of times a week I had to go to a middle school and clean their hallway floors and gymnasium with a Zamboni-type vehicle that mopped and scrubbed the floor. When I was there, I had the whole school to myself. I used to get finished quickly and go to the library and read while eating my dinner. Well, one morning after being there, I got a call from school security and they wanted me to come in. When I got there, I saw a police car too. Uh-oh, I think. They asked me a few questions like, "Did you notice anything out of the ordinary or strange while you were here last night?" No, I hadn't. I usually have my headphones in. Security then shows me camera footage of someone breaking into one of the classrooms while I was riding the Zamboni not far away. I was there for another 2 hours. Nothing was stolen, but the worst part was they didn't have footage of the person leaving. They didn't go out the way they came in, and police had to sweep the entire school. Never did find out what happened with that one. I think someone needs to go check up on the person who wrote this comment because as far as I'm concerned, there's a non-zero chance he's being haunted by a phantom and may have been cursed or something in his subsequent shifts at the school. I used to work on a ship and we usually go on 3 to 10 months at a time. I work night shifts, so this meant I could sleep in the sleeping quarters during daytime with either just me or a handful of other crew members, where usually there'd be 20 to 30 of us in there. It wasn't so bad. Actually, I really liked it because it's a lot more peaceful sleeping during the day. You don't hear anyone else snoring or someone's footsteps because they get up in the night to pee or anything like that. All you can hear is the light creak of the walls and the floors of the ship, and all you can feel is the sway of it on the ocean. A bit haunting and creepy if you really think about it, but I like it. All of that ended when there was a short period of time where there were only 2 of us sleeping in the room. At least that's what I thought. I started hearing light taps across the room. At first they were light taps, then it would get a bit faster, and sometimes a bit louder. I'd ignore it if it wasn't so utterly annoying. I looked at where the other guy was sleeping and he seems to be fast asleep, accompanied by his light snoring. Second day, there it goes again. I tried to follow the sound, but for some reason it bounced around the room like an echo. Eventually, it comes to an abrupt halt, so I tried to sleep it off. During the night shift, I tried to ask the other guy if he had heard it, but he said he was too tired to even notice. I guess I'm alone in this pursuit. On the third day, I take my pursuit one step further by not sleeping right away. I'd be fully awake when it started, so I'll have a better chance of discovering the source. And there it goes again. This time I go from one empty rack to the next, until finally it was loud as heck, tapping in progress. My heart was thumping like a jackhammer. I pulled the curtain to one side. There lay the biggest dude I've seen on the ship, holding his manhood mid-stroke. You have no idea the speech I'd prepared for this guy in my head for keeping me up for several days, but at that exact moment I had no idea what to say. Of course, I gave out a small yelp, which didn't help the situation. I never thought I'd be locking eyes with another guy while he's gripping his eggplant while I begin this honorable pursuit. With the current situation, I mustered my best attempt at displaying my irritation. It somehow came out as an apology, followed by, "I keep hearing tapping noises." He hadn't said anything yet, but at that exact moment I realized his elbow, which belonged to the working arm, was resting right on the wall, probably banging on it over and over and over. I didn't wait for a reply. I nodded my head, kind of rolled my eyes, and walked away. It will never be easy trying to avoid a big guy like him every day in the same sleeping quarters. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. On our drill ship that was built in China, we noticed on the blueprints that there was a room. We went to look at it and couldn't find an entrance, but the spacing was obvious that there was an extra room. It might not sound so creepy unless you've been in these shipyards where two things are known to happen. Stowaways, although I doubt that was the case, but also hundreds of workers at any given time just following orders blindly. So we confirmed that the room had all 6 sides, yet not a single weld on the outside. There's only one way this could have happened, and I'm sure you're starting to get it now. They must have welded from the inside for this room and then realized they had no way out upon completion if the gases hadn't killed them first. It's extremely heavy around that room. People say they hear things. I definitely have. This isn't some old ship either. I rode this ship from China to Amsterdam after completion, and then the maiden voyage to America. I guess it happens quick. So that's where the monster that will eventually break out and lead to a really great horror event aboard the ship is being kept. I can't wait to find out what it is, although I do hope that the Netflix movie holds up to the real events. When I was 15 years old, I was doing my 4 a.m. newspaper delivery round on my bicycle. I was driving into the garden of this one subscriber where I saw 2 guys with flashlights looking through the windows of the house. I was kind of in shock and just said, "Good morning, guys." They were just as much in shock, and an awkward silence followed. I tried to break the silence by asking if I could pass them to deliver the newspaper through the door, and one of the guys said the person living in that house did something to his family, and they took it as an opportunity to get away in their car that was still running. When they were gone, I rang the doorbell at the house to tell them what had happened, and they should keep an eye out. This is kind of how you end up like that kid in Breaking Bad. We were wrapping up for the day in northern Canada. I was fueling up the side boom. I was all by myself at this point because I was tired of listening to the laborers whine about the cold, so I told them I'd take care of the rest. Think bulldozer with no blade, but a giant metal boom on the side that we used to raise and lower the pipe. It was February, so pitch black. I keep hearing some weird sound. I can't quite hear it because the pump is too loud. I search around a couple of times and see nothing. I get in the truck and take off and drive past the front of the side boom to see a cougar sitting on top of a pile of dirt 15 feet away. The damn thing was just watching me there and probably could have ended me without even realizing it. I've never seen a cougar in the wild before, and it's hard to understand just how big they are and how powerful until you get up close to one. That thing leapt off the 6-foot pile and probably didn't touch the ground for 15 to 20 feet. It's terrifying to think something so big and powerful could just be sitting there, deciding if they want to make you dinner. I'm not sure if this counts, but I'm a teacher at an urban public school and was at work late grading and packing for the next day. Time had kind of flown by, and before I knew it, it was 7 p.m. I started packing up to leave in a building that is, in theory, locked and empty besides me, when our Alice alarm goes off, indicating an armed intruder in the building. I am 1. Alone, 2. Young, and 3. Freaked as hell because I am absolutely not ready to fight a weapon-toting madman over my lesson plans. I book it out of the school and dive into my car, hearing the alarm blaring the entire time. I peel out of the parking lot and can see in my rear view the alarm lights still flashing and debate never going back, because screw that. Turns out they were doing routine maintenance and didn't send out an email to the teachers. My mum used to live in a small town in the Cascade Mountains and worked as a forest ranger. The creepiest thing that happened was when the oldest male ranger kept hitting on her and trying to get her to come home with him. Not very out of the ordinary, but many years later, after she'd left the town, she found out he'd been convicted of manslaughter and had killed a young female ranger right before she got hired. She probably would have been his next target. I worked as the county historic preservationist in southern Appalachia, working on the buildings and properties the county owned. One of the benefits included with my job was living on site at one of the historic properties. The historic house was an imposing brick mansion built in the 1810s, and I lived in a small caretaker's house about 20 feet away. This was in the backwoods, so to deter trespassing and vandalism, the county had built an 8-foot-tall fence around the entire 5-acre parcel and put barbed wire on top of the fence. I mention all of this just to show it was basically impossible for anyone or anything to jump or climb over the fencing and onto the property. One night, after working late at another property, I pulled up to my entrance gate, let myself in, locked it behind me, and then drove the 100 yards down the gravel road to my house. There were no lights on the property, so I could only see by my headlights. As I turned my car around the corner of one of the outbuildings and parked it, my lights shone on a thing that I still have a hard time describing effectively. It was the size of a deer, but with long spindly legs and long shaggy hair. Almost like a taller maned wolf, if you've ever seen pictures of one of those. That alone shook me, as there's no way something of that size should have been able to get through or over my fencing. What follows is absolutely true. I got out of my car to get a better look at what the heck that thing was, and as I opened the door and got out, the thing took off running away. Not on 4 legs, but on 2. I literally watched this thing raise its back up, stand at full height on its back legs, and sprint away. I absolutely freaked out at that point. I grabbed my mag light and my shotty from inside and tried to find the thing again. There was no trace, no tracks or anything. I have no idea how it got in or out of my property. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat on my couch with my shotty, watching the front door, hoping that whatever I saw didn't come back and burst in. I can't explain what the heck I saw that night, but it still raises hair on my neck every time I think about it. And that would be the story of how I quit that job, because I think if you stick around, your only career advancement is going to be mauled corpse found by the protagonist later with the exposition diary warning them to run. I think I'll wait for a better part, thank you. My oldest brother used to work the overnight sprinklers on a golf course. He took me out one time just for fun, and as we were driving uphill on a fairway, a figure of a lady appeared in the headlights at the top of the hill. My brother steered a little to the left of her and kept driving right on by. I stared right into her eyes as we drove past, and she stared back. Her eyes glowed like a cat in the night. As soon as we were out of voice range, I asked my brother, "Who the hell was that?" He calmly responded, "Oh yeah, she lives on the golf course and likes to terrorize the workers from time to time. I usually see her out here once a week." Alright, cool. When I was a kid living in Queensland, Australia, I used to bush bash, meaning walk off the beaten track through thick scrub. I knew the national park my house backed onto like the back of my hand. I knew from the topography where I was at all times. Both of my parents were ex-military and had a sort of hands-off approach, trusting me even as young as 12 to venture off on my own into the wilderness. So I could just pack a lunch, and my sister and neighborhood friend would come with. We'd head off early in the morning, returning just before sunset, usually. Once, when I, the eldest, was about 14, we had been following creek beds and bashing over heavily forested hills towards an area I'd never been. We came down a hill, through a gully full of ferns, and followed a dry creek bed for another hour. The sides of the creek became steep and rocky. Before long, we were passing through a gorge. As we emerged from the gorge, we noticed what looked like a dwelling. Being idiot kids, we wanted to see what was up. It looked abandoned at first, but as we got closer, we saw that tarps had been affixed to a ramshackle structure. Chicken wire surrounded what looked like a pen just outside. As my eyes traveled across it, I suddenly caught another pair of eyes looking directly back at me. A Rottweiler. We started slowly edging back away from the property, but it was too late. The dog started going nuts, and worried that it was coming after us, or at least alerting the person living in the hut, we bolted. I went back to the area a few times, but not too close to the abode itself, and found discarded bones from small game and other bits and pieces, spent .22 casings and a few other things. As an adult and knowing the area, it's very likely we stumbled across a homeless person camping out or a crystal lab, as the area, as I'd find out as an adult, was absolutely riddled with crystal labs. Some friends and I were fishing a small pond just after dark for catfish. We started to hear sounds coming off the water like someone was throwing softball-sized rocks, but they were coming from all over the pond. We thought someone was messing with us, and we called out a few times for them to stop, but we eventually got freaked out and left. Cut to a few years later, I'm fishing a different pond and hear the same sound. Turns out it was a beaver slapping its tail on the water to drive me from its territory. When beavers become problems in rivers, they relocate them to ponds in town. I've been fishing out in the Gulf of Mexico where they have some oil rigs. This rig wasn't being used, from what we knew, so we'd get pretty close to it to fish for red snapper. While we were out there, we could have sworn we heard screams of a woman over and over. It was some crap, but the explanation was the wind making the noises as it blew through the rig. Well, that's what we were told, but it totally creeped us the F out. I work as a polar bear guard, as in I escort people across tundra and mountains and protect them from polar bears. I once saw a snowman totem with reindeer antlers coming out of his head. It was deformed, full of bullet holes, and rather creepy. I spent a summer in Wyoming going to BLM land and lots of other remote locations, collecting data on bats and herpetofauna. Heard a lot of weird noises like mountain lions screaming, deer snorting, and what sounded like owls fighting. Woke up one morning to find 2 bull moose sleeping 20 yards behind my tent. All of this was part of the job, until one night a truck was driving towards us when we were on a BLM square in the southwestern part of the state. The truck was going overland on no road and was slowly driving at us. It stopped about 100 yards away, turned off the lights, and we could see a person get out. They walked a full circle around us at 100 yards away, got back in the truck, and turned around. This was after dark, and the shadowy figure did a complete circle around us. You could hear them walking through the sagebrush, and I'm sure they could hear us talking. We packed up after that and drove to a hotel an hour away. I called the office and told them I was taking a weapon when we went back out. I didn't like having the bear mace as our only defense. What is the weirdest thing you found at the bottom of an elevator shaft? I once accidentally lost my driver's license down the little gap in the elevator doors. I just dropped it and was super unlucky as it slipped through. It turned up in my mail 10 years later. Obviously long expired, but still crazy that some maintenance guy found it and bothered returning it. Pest control tech here. Snakes had gotten into the pit and were climbing up and dropping down on people as they rode the elevator. Good times. Snakes on an Elevator, the sequel to the Samuel L. Jackson movie. Worked at a hotel, guests dropped their phone down the shaft. After a few failed retrieval efforts, we called the elevator guys. They went down and got the phone and also found a carton of eggs. Rotten, but not cracked. I don't even understand how that could happen, actually. Because it was no accident. I work in tech now, but while I was in college, I helped an HVAC guy, and he had once had me put a carton of fresh eggs in the duct of a client's office that had stiffed him before. When I asked him why he was doing this, he said, "If this mother effer doesn't pay up, he's going to have a new issue." But then the guy paid 2 days later and I was sent to retrieve the eggs. He called it his 99-cents insurance policy. We found well over 1,500 tax returns at the bottom of the ATO's North Brisbane office elevator shaft. Oh my frickin' god, I know who dropped those. Like, exactly who. A person I know told us a story about how they used to work in the ATO Brisbane office, and if anything came across their desk that was too hard, it was dropped into the bottom of the elevator shaft. We were only talking about it the other night, having a giggle about what would happen if they were ever found. They giggled, saying a crap load of files went missing in that shaft. This was way back in the day, like 25 plus years ago, before computers and well before the internet. If something needed to be sent out, they'd have to fill in a form by hand, and then that was typed up by another person on a typewriter and then sent out in a letter. So it was easy to make paperwork disappear. I feel like 1,500 individual tax returns for a company would account for an awful lot of money. The author who replied to that must feel pretty confident nobody will care enough anymore. My dad was an elevator mechanic for about 15 years. He had a very dark sense of humor and would come home with some of the craziest stories. For example, anytime he was in an elevator, he would shake it a little or tap on the displays or buttons and go, "Yep, total piece of crap, inferior piece of crap." And I think he mostly just did it to freak people out. One of my favorites, he got a call that someone was hearing weird noises from the elevator. He got inside and rode the elevator up, and sure enough, he could hear it too. For half a second, he thought it was a baby crying and realized it was a cat. When he got to a certain floor, he could hear this sad meowing. It obviously wasn't in the elevator car, so he got into the shaft and found this little orange kitty. It had somehow, and I don't think he figured it out or told us, got into the elevator shaft and was sitting in a spot between floors where it wouldn't get crushed by the elevator, but it couldn't get out. My dad saved it and gave it to the building manager to see if it belonged to anyone in the building. It was the one time he ever told us a story that involved him saving an animal instead of finding dead ones. Cats are made of liquid, I'm pretty serious about that. They have a lot of floof and fit through cracks and crevices much smaller than you think should be possible. My dad supervises elevator mechanics, and one of them called him from a mental hospital and said, "You've got to see this." The maintenance guy was called because the elevator wasn't quite sitting level on the ground floor. It was about half an inch too high, and both patients and staff had been tripping on it. But all other floors were no problem. My dad arrived to find the maintenance guy cackling and looking into the bottom of the shaft. There were probably tens of thousands of magazines down there. They had to get a bunch of shovels, a small crew, and a rolling dumpster to clear it out. When it was all done, my dad decided to stay behind and pretend to read a newspaper while he sat in the lobby. After about half an hour, he sees an elderly patient holding a magazine, shuffling slowly toward the elevator. He stops in front of the doors, glances left, glances right, and quickly stoops down and slides the magazine into the gap, and shovels away as fast as he can with a huge grin on his face. My dad couldn't help but laugh hysterically. This guy had probably been sliding magazines in there multiple times per day, every day for decades. I should ask him whether he reported it or let the guy have his fun. It wouldn't surprise me if my dad went with the latter. As a psychiatrist, I've become fairly desensitized to weird patient actions, but I appreciate this story for how long this patient was doing this. Usually the passive-aggressive stuff goes away quickly, but this man sounds resilient as frick. Imagine what he could have done without getting served a bad genetic hand. Our medical team dropped a steel butthole dilator down the dumbwaiter shaft by mistake. When the technician came and grabbed it off the floor, I'll never forget the look on his face when I told him, "We need that up here, it's got to go in someone's butt soon." It was priceless. I'm a technician for a hospital dealing with rectal surgical tools. It's very normal. That poor dilator, it got away for a minute. Thought it was finally leaving that wretched life behind. Next thing it knows, it's lying at the bottom of a filthy dumbwaiter shaft. And just when it's starting to get used to that, thinking, not much of a view, but a lot roomier than I'm used to, along comes the elevator tech and it's back to the old day in, day out. It must have really done something bad in a previous life. I bet it was Roy Cohn. We found a couch. Not joking, it was a walk-in pit that a homeless person had retrofit into a small living room. One of my baseball coaches when I was a kid lost his glass eyeball in an elevator shaft. The maintenance guy gave him a solid "what the frick." One time we were doing a rip-out at an old factory. They were gutting them and turning them into luxury apartments. The elevator that we were taking out was a crappy old freight that hadn't run in years. When we finally ran it up, we went down to inspect the pit. It smelled like a dead body had chilled there for half a century. The bottom floor wasn't lit, so I shined my flashlight under the elevator, and the whole floor started moving. Roaches. Nasty. Haven't really found anything fun in my time. I've cleaned out more pits than I could count to. I gave my mum a cheap ring I found a pair of underwear at a hotel, and I found a full packet of transcribed documents at a courthouse. Oh, and I was on a mod once, and one of the hoistway doors had an advertisement sticker for a tennis restringing service. Which was weird because it was somewhere only an elevator guy would be able to reach. I called the number, but it was out of service. I found some cool graffiti from the 40s. That's about it. I've worked on escalators for a year and a half. There was a lot more in those pits. I was taking home bent-up quarters every day. There were lots of shoe bits, and I was always nervous of coming across used needles in certain units. I do work at a large hotel. A few years ago, one of our elevators stopped working. Turned out when they opened it up, they found a 3-foot pile of guest folios that were never delivered to rooms. Later, when we looked on the camera, we found it was a security guard that got tired of delivering them to the rooms and instead dropped them down the elevator shaft. He did this for months until he was caught. As an elevator technician, this question should be my jam, but unfortunately I've never found anything interesting. A $2 coin once, a dime bag of some unknown substance, plenty of syringes, or sets of keys. It's mostly just people's junk mail and empty chip bags down there. I had a coworker who was opening a candy bar and dropped it down the shaft by accident. Hopefully the building's rats were able to enjoy it. I think those rats prefer the term elevator maintenance folk. The elevator guys in my dad's office complex found pieces of a dog's skeleton. Not the whole skeleton, just random parts. I wonder who was dropping poor Fido down the shaft piecemeal and from where. There was logistical effort involved in this very sad incident. I worked in hotel maintenance. A guest reported waterfall sounds in an elevator shaft en route to the lobby. An investigation ensued. A sump pump at the bottom of the shaft was running water constantly. Water is still coming out of the drain it's connected to after I unplug it. Find out from notes from third shift maintenance that multiple first-floor rooms had repeated clogged toilets all night long. The plumber called. A 6-inch sewer drain for the entire building is clogged. Worst clog I've ever seen in 15 years. Washcloths and TP. Over 7 inches of clog in the pipe. Apparently it was clogged so badly that it was backing up to the laundry room and the drain for the elevator shaft and the rooms closest to the main pipe out of the building. This was on the first-floor suites. There were solid turds at the bottom of that shaft after that event. I quit about a week later for unrelated circumstances. In conclusion, turds. I found keys and trash, bugs if the building is exceptionally crappy, mostly just dirt and rust. I found a paint roller that the last guy left there once. It was stuck to the floor. Not a whole lot of weird stuff can make it between the sill and the landing. Surprisingly, nothing too extreme. I'm an electrician, so we will find ourselves in a pit from time to time. Some ID badges, credit cards, coins. Once I found a red pen. It was out of ink, though. I worked security in a large department store. We routinely had to pop it open to retrieve dropped keys, wallets, and phones. Recovered a $2,500 gold necklace covered in poop. A would-be shoplifter darted out of our jewelry department and suitcased the necklace while in the elevator. When he realized we were waiting for him at the exit level, he went back up a floor, removed it, and dropped it down the shaft. We arrested him anyway, much to his surprise. Work for a major transit hub. We have our own trade departments. I'm in elevating. Weirdest things I've found are as follows. A Chucky doll head, 13 rubber duckies in one pit, syringes almost daily, and a silicone gimp mask. Every day is an adventure. At a place where my wife used to work, a body. There was a crash from the elevator area. The boss went to see what it was and came back white as a sheet and said, "Do not go in there." 2 maintenance guys had been working on the elevator, and one of them was in the bottom of the shaft and the other one made a small error. But I'm guessing the single most unusual item ever found at the bottom of an elevator shaft was a Wright R2600 aircraft engine on July 28, 1945, in the Empire State Building. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I used to work at an old 22-story building that had the first automated elevator system in our state. The idea was, in order to control the flow of people in the lobby, you would push the button for your floor and the elevator would tell you which one to get in. The elevators would make sure the crowds spread out over the big lobby. Anyway, it was the first time I'd ever seen the auto-open eyes used, too. I worked on the executive floor where the long-winded executives would often stop me as I was leaving. I got used to passing my hand through the doors to break the eye and hold the doors open. You guessed it, my left hand didn't trip the eye. The doors closed on my hand, which were prevented from closing completely because of my heavy engagement and wedding rings. Crushed the whole mess and lost a 2-carat diamond 22 stories below. My hand was only bruised, thank goodness for a safety shutoff. I like to think that someday someone will find a tiny treasure. I'm not a technician, but I can tell you some dude at some point is going to find a Kindle at the bottom of a shaft in a Toronto hotel elevator. Rules to remember. Rule 1. Always check that you zipped your carry-on and didn't leave a gap in the bottom. Rule 2. Kindles fit through small carry-on bag zipper gaps and elevator shaft gaps. Not an elevator repair person, but you'd be shocked by the number of nurses that drop their keys down the shaft. 20 stories up and 2 buildings away from the parking garage, and they already had their keys in their hand. I had to call maintenance all the time for retrieval. I once dropped my keys stepping into an elevator and they landed on the gap, with one key bridging the gap and all the others hanging down. Let me tell you, I reached down and grabbed them most gingerly. I used to keep my work security pass and the card holder in my wallet. Once my friend bumped me as we were getting out of the lift and the same thing happened. It landed straight across the gap. All those years of playing Operation finally get to pay off sooner or later. I work as a phlebotomist in a hospital and had just drawn an elderly male patient. As I pushed my little cart into the elevator to go back down to the lab, his blood vials rolled off and both went right down the gap into the shaft. I felt so bad and immediately went back to tell him I had to redraw him. He was thrilled, said he was excited his blood would be down in the shaft for eternity. Such a funny guy. Retired after 40 years in the elevator maintenance trade, the best I ever found was a $20 bill, but I know a man that found a $7,000 diamond ring he kept for 6 months and no one ever asked about it. He gave it to his wife. Empty substance bags or used rubbers and needles, money or discarded lotto tickets, usually the norm. If you're lucky, maybe an infestation of roaches sometimes. I'm reading a lot, and I mean a lot of people in the other comments who found purple adult toys. It's all in the same shaft, so to speak. Not elevator maintenance, but one time I dropped a set of wheels for a cart in the crack. I'm sure some maintenance man is going to be concerned to find loose wheels in the elevator of a nursing home, like some elderly person is walking around with a wheelless walker. I found a doll sitting upright in a corner and a little bag of smack. I'm willing to bet a reasonable amount that if you took the substances, then you'd wake up in the middle of the night with that doll haunting your household. Not exactly an answer to the question, but still adjacent. When we came to a call about broken doors, we were not expecting that someone, for some unknown reasons, stole one half of an elevator's doors. I found a whole salmon and a king crab in the same kitchen elevator of a seafood restaurant. $100 and $20 bills, and tons of syringes and rubbers. In 1988, the same bones were rediscovered when a new elevator shaft near the south parking lot on Elm Street was excavated. At that time, 11 skulls and 88 pounds of bones were found on one day, followed by 119 more pounds of bones. The Inquirer reported that they were being stored at the morgue. Cincinnati Music Hall, built on a children's home, built on a potter's field, built on a burial site, built on bulldozed indigenous mounds. I mean, that place is definitely not haunted, right? Holy crap, I've just asked a guy I knew who does this work last night. It wasn't surprising as I expected, just a ball, a very large ball, that had no business being able to get down there. Then I asked if he ever left anything strange down there for the next guy. He went quiet and slowly turned to me, pulling a Barbie out of his pocket. I found the Chamber of Secrets. You're a maintenance technician, Harry. Not in elevator repair. A few months ago, we had a floridly psychopathic patient. Think staring into space, can't form a coherent sentence, and a few other symptoms. He was brought into hospital. There was a fire alarm at an apartment building, and when the fire team went in, they somehow found this guy living in an elevator shaft. He had evidently been there for some period of time. Most of his delusions that he was talking about for me, that I could understand, were about time travel and Jesus. So we were joking a bit that he wasn't actually psychotic and was just time-traveling Jesus. It depends on the building and neighborhood. I've seen everything from dirty diapers to used needles, keys, wallets, phones, picture frames, sandwiches, and I guess the icing on the cake was a Tamagotchi. No, it didn't work, so we typically just trashed everything unless it was valuable. I always turned jewelry into the management's office, but I worked with guys who definitely sold valuables for unsavory purposes. In conclusion, that crack between the car and the door is a black hole for objects. The company where I worked had an old heavy-duty freight elevator that was semi-abandoned. It was more like an automotive lift with giant pistons embedded in the ground, but installed in an elevator shaft. When they needed to move something huge, they would fill the hydraulics with oil. It took hundreds of gallons of oil to top off the system, including the giant pistons, and then they would use it for a day. A few months later, they would try to use it again and find the oil gone. Once, they planned to use it the following day, so maintenance pumped in the oil to get ready. The next day, no oil. They refilled it the morning of the move and got one lift out of it before it stopped. The company knew it was spilling hydraulic oil into the ground under the plant and just didn't give a crap. They finally abandoned it for good when the maintenance guys threatened to report the illegal oil dumping. I had to clean some bad insulation at the top of the elevator chamber. So the maintenance guy brought the elevator to the top of the second floor and we got on top to reach up. On the elevator car were a few pairs of women's underwear and used rubbers. So someone was doing the deed on top of the elevator. How they got there was a mystery because it was a very modern one, and you need a special key to open the control box to access the top of the elevator. 100% this special key is the exact same key across thousands of elevators. Some jerk with a 3D printer, plaster, LED, and a high-resolution camera, i.e. a modern smartphone, can pretty accurately reproduce working keys from a photograph. Or you just buy the 5 most common keys on eBay for $15. In college, I pulled out my lanyard on which my Motorola Razr was sitting. My phone flew up in the air and dropped in the gap between the elevator and the floor. It dropped 4 floors. Maintenance was able to climb down there, and my phone barely had a scratch. My dad has been an elevator repairman for almost 30 years now. His best find to date was a $12,000 yellow diamond engagement ring. Tried for a while to find the owner, but eventually he got to keep it. Been in the game for 12 years now, found a full Christmas tree last month. Other finds are $5K and $20 notes, a big bag of substances, roughly 5 kilograms of brand new shoes by the boxload, and a severed finger. So backstory, the Christmas tree was found this year on a council estate in August. Photos were taken for the office as it was rather amusing. I visit this lift every month. The money and substances were found in the same lift around 3 months apart 7 years ago. The money was split between me and my engineer, as I was an apprentice at the time. The substances we handed into security. The shoes were found on a passenger staff lift out the back of JD Sports. We suspect a staff member was sticking them down there and loading them into a car at the end of his shift. Police were involved in this one. The finger was found in a very expensive apartment building. We're talking 50 floors and million-dollar apartments. Again, police and emergency medical services were involved in this one. Elevator repairman here. I haven't found anything crazy, just the normal stuff. Cockroaches, underwear, and a couple of bucks. But since you're reading this, I'll let you in on a little-known feature. Elevators have a tipping feature. If you slip money down between the sill into the pit, the elevator will get you to your floor faster. If you put in enough money, it will skip all other calls and bring you right to your floor. You're welcome. No, don't mind me down here. I found ID cards, keys, small dead animals, lizards and rats mostly, lots of cobwebs, needles, one AirPod, and things like that. The weirdest thing I've ever found as a repair guy is a clean pit. The service guys normally don't clean anything. I remember when I was maybe 10, I had a Nokia 3310, I believe, one of the brick ones anyway. I dropped it down the bottom of the elevator shaft in the small gap between the doors on the 6th or 7th floor. It was down there for months until I saw the elevator and maintenance man and asked if he could have a look. Not only was it still down there, unbroken, it still had battery life. Those were the days. I'm not an elevator maintenance person, but I have been in dozens of elevator shafts for work. I'm a bomb tech, and when I was in the army, I did a lot of POTUS and VIP missions in conjunction with the Secret Service. They don't have a bomb squad, so they steal us. It's a great gig, and you get to travel all over and stay in some insanely nice hotels. Anyway, the elevator shafts must be cleared to ensure there aren't any devices in there. Basically, any place that the POTUS or VIP will go needs to be checked out. I've done a fair amount of elevator surfing, which is riding on top of the car. The weirdest and funniest thing I've ever seen was a 12-inch Superman figurine that had its feet glued to the top of the elevator. The head was slightly tilted back and the arms were pointing upwards, so it appeared like Superman was flying up, up and away whenever the elevator was in use. I have a picture of it saved on an external hard drive somewhere. That crap was hilarious. What wedding moment made you think, ooh, they're not going to last long? She told me 2 days before that she found her fiancé annoying and that she didn't like him and that he was awful in bed. She was visibly, endlessly uncomfortable at the rehearsal, wedding, and dinner combo. Then she sobbed the entire morning day of. She ended up not getting any makeup done because she wouldn't stop scream-sobbing and refused to get dressed, stalling the wedding by like 35 minutes. Then she said 45 minutes of vows that she had prepared, 9 pages of things like inappropriate vows to friends, family, his parents and sisters, none of them to her husband, and then almost didn't say I do. Managed to get a, yeah, okay, yeah I do, out of her almost a full 60 seconds after she was supposed to say anything. I could go on for hours, but it was the most painful and awkward wedding I've ever been to. I've got my money on maybe 10 months. We're 1 month in. 2.5 month update, I've distanced myself from them completely. She's really clingy and likes to gossip about how awful her husband is, and I really don't have the time. She's also told me they're in couples therapy after I expressed negativity towards some extremely concerning things she said regarding their relationship and lack of communication. But I'm still betting on 10 months because she believes it's all his fault and truly believes his parents and sisters are exactly the same. Newsflash, they're all lovely people. 5 month update, I no longer associate with them, so I'm out of the loop regarding the juicy details. Last I heard, they keep moving all over the country and fight non-stop. No more lovey-dovey images on social media. Seems to be right on track for a 10-month breakup. Strangely enough, I didn't have the thought about the couple getting married, but the best man and maid of honor who were married to each other. The best man's speech was all about how hard it was to be married. I've been married for a year and it feels like 100 years. Maid of honor stands up to give a speech and just says, ditto. It was so awkward and really brought the whole room down. The brother of the bride stood up and gave a nice impromptu speech about teamwork and having a partner to go through life with, how happy the family was to have the groom join their family. Best man and maid of honor were divorced within a year. The couple who got married are still married 30 years later. I sometimes wonder if the speeches were actually helpful in how not to act as a couple. There's some complex backstory to the brother's speech. The bride's brother is gay and has been in a long-term relationship for 40-plus years at time of writing. At the time he gave his speech about marriage, he couldn't marry the man he loved, and I think his passionate defense of marriage was born from that. When people would say they were against gay marriage because it makes a mockery of marriage, I'd think of that night. The married couple who had no respect for marriage could easily marry, and did over and over again. And the man who stood up and defended marriage could not. He's married now and lovingly takes care of his husband as he battles health issues. It's a special kind of thought process that leads a man to think that giving a speech about how much of a drag marriage is at a wedding will be a good idea. Well, at least he and his partner supported each other in that statement, for once. When they were doing the vows and the priest got to the for richer or poorer part, she said, for richer, or maybe poorer. The officiant wasn't pleased. I think they made it a year. I've got two. One of my good friends got married and I'd never met her before the wedding because she's just shy. On the wedding day, she was belligerently drunk before the ceremony even started and couldn't even get through the lines she was supposed to repeat. Like, I promise to love you. She ended up slapping the groom, spilling champagne on her dress and then crying under a table while he tried to comfort her. They lasted about 4 months. Another one was my wife's friend. She's a very conservative, religious white girl who married a black man. Most of her racist family didn't approve of the marriage and didn't show up, but she planned the whole marriage around race. Like a vanilla cake for her and a chocolate cake for him, the wedding colors were black and white, and even the meals were white meat for her side and dark meat for his. It was extremely uncomfortable as a guest. They lasted 2 years, but broke up because he was nuts and attacked her, rather than the weird racial tension. My wedding. We'll start 3 days before. The wedding was a Ren Fair-style wedding outside a large gazebo, and the maid of honor had promised to purchase a stylized dress for my bride that they'd agreed on. 3 days before the wedding, she calls to tell us she has no money and was embarrassed to admit it before now. So we literally hand-sewed one together in 24 hours. In my opinion, it turned out pretty nice for what we had. The bride's mother was supposed to pick up the cake in Austin, Texas, and drive an hour south for the wedding. She left her house 30 minutes before the wedding to pick it up. When she finally showed up, an hour late, the cake was destroyed. She had put it in the back seat and driven like hell all the way down, just slamming it against the box at every turn. During the 1 hour delay, there was almost a fistfight between two groomsmen because, well, the maid of honor showed up in the dress that she was unable to afford. Obvious attempt to upstage the bride. The same maid of honor during her speech after the ceremony started it off by saying, "When we all met, I didn't like Paul at all. However, I found he grows on you, like a fungus." Needless to say, my entire side of the family was super cold through all of this. Since all of these issues were on her side of friendships or families, I was told to suck it up and we'll discuss it later. I sort of assumed that a lot of these friends had just shown themselves the door. Quite the opposite. In fact, 2 years later when I accepted my first well-paying job out of college, it became an issue that it was an hour and a half out of Austin, so she just decided to stay in ATX to be with her friends. I mailed her the divorce papers, and since she couldn't be bothered to even show up for the hearing, I've never seen her again. I used to work at David's Bridal. The bride came in with tons of friends, we did the say yes to the dress thing, and an hour later she was standing there in $3,000 worth of stuff and doesn't have any money with her or in her account. She decides she wants to apply for the store credit card. I run it through the system and she gets denied. Then she calls the groom for his info, which to be fair, people did all the time, and he tells her no. She threw a huge fit on the phone with him, standing on the bridal stage literally demanding, "Why not? Why? Why?" Like an actual child over and over again. I've never seen a 30-year-old age backwards so quickly. She was just a brat, literally stomping her feet in front of me and all her friends and the other brides in the store. I was embarrassed. At the end of all that, she hangs up on him and her friend is like, "I'm so sorry you can't get your dress." And the bride instantly stops crying and goes, "Oh, I'll get the dress. I just have to do this at home, and when he gets mad enough, he'll come get it for me, so I'll stop." I was speechless. Sure enough, the girl came back 2 days later with her man and he applied for the credit card and brought the dress. He was livid and silent and she was smug as hell. Can't imagine they're living a happy marriage if they're still together. I'm witnessing one from the sidelines now. My wife's brother just got married this past May. The bride's mother is a big DIY person and went a little nuts with extra flowers, table pieces, decorations, and other things. Note that I said extra stuff. It was already decorated by the venue, she just took it upon herself to buy and add way more stuff. Anyway, a few weeks ago she sends my mother-in-law, the groom's mum, an email with receipts of all the extra stuff she brought. $7,000 worth, and asked that she pay half since it was technically set up in time for the rehearsal dinner for guests to enjoy. It's causing a huge rift between the newlyweds since the bride is taking her mum's side. My wife got invited to a client's daughter's wedding. The couple were both drama students, and many of the bridal party were drama students. The maid of honor's toast consisted of tearful declarations of unrequited love to the groom, along the lines of, "If it couldn't be me, I'm glad it's my best friend that's marrying you." The best man's speech was a lusty declaration of, "If it doesn't work out, call me, babe, like the previous time you called me." The other toasts were similarly weird. A guy at the table I was seated at was a friend of the bride and said to me that he was this close to standing up during the "speak now or forever hold your peace" thing. I'm still not sure if the whole thing was a bunch of emotionally messed up 20-year-olds or one big piece of performance art. As a man who has dabbled in theatre at a couple of different levels, I can confirm that drama students who take classes together have often seemed like a weird incestuous family. It's fine up until someone inevitably gets jealous. I was the maid of honor. Me, the best man, and the couple went into a separate little room to do the signing stuff. The bride excused herself to go to the bathroom, and the groom started making pretty mean remarks about her cooking. Her cooking is something she's really passionate about, by the way. He was making these comments to the officiary. She came back, heard they were talking about cooking family meals together, and gave him the warmest smile, thinking he had praised her. He scoffed awkwardly and changed the topic. That always stuck with me. He wasn't laughing with her, but at her, behind her back. They lasted 7 months. A fun, light-hearted dance with the groom, followed by a close and slow dance with her male best friend. How long did that marriage last? It lasted 18 months, and now she's living with the friend. He ended up in the emergency room between the ceremony and the reception. He had gone out the night before with his sister and friends and got plastered. They had to hold a cold pack to the back of his neck to keep him vertical during the wedding photos. Marriage lasted 30 days until they had a fight, she left the house, and he filled the U-Haul truck with everything but her clothes. The groom showed up to his own wedding reception wearing a t-shirt with restroom sign-style stick figures depicting a bride and a groom, captioned, "Game over." The bride had a bruised eye covered by makeup. Also, it was visible that walking was hurting her. I might think it was because the corset was pushing on broken ribs. It took her 3 years to run away. When my sister married her first husband, she mouthed to my father walking her down the aisle, "I can make this work, right?" They were divorced 6 months later. My whole family knew it wasn't a good idea since the original engagement was a year prior. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When the bride drank vodka out of a pint glass and spent a significant amount of time making out with another guy on the dance floor. Oh well, the first part isn't necessarily a deal breaker. One of the best weddings I've ever been to included an Olympics between the bride and her bridesmaids, Russian, and the groom and his groomsmen, Lebanese. Main event was a vodka relay where they, no crap, chugged pint glasses. Lebanese put in a fantastic showing, but the Russians mopped the floor with them without even taking their heels off. It was hilarious. They all still managed to host and throw a wonderful party for another few hours, and they've been happily married for over a decade with 3 beautiful kids. Oh, and my husband just reminded me that these motherfrickers woke up the next morning and hosted brunch for us. Unbelievable. When the bride tried to playfully feed the groom some cake, pulling it back once it got close to his mouth. The third time she did this, he slapped it out of her hand and stormed off. In the ensuing awkward silence and wide-eyed staring, we all knew it wouldn't last. Surprisingly, they were together for nearly 2 years before the bride eloped away with her stepbrother. No one saw that coming. Prior to my wedding, I'd asked my husband to practice dancing with me because I'm uncoordinated due to a disability. He blew me off and said we'd be fine. As we were dancing, he spoke in my ear, not even quietly. "What are you doing? What's wrong with you? You're embarrassing me." We lasted 2 years. Leaving was the best decision I ever made. My uncle, when he broke his neck trying to break dance on his stag do, he went down the aisle in a wheelchair. She divorced shortly after. He can walk again now, but because of his surgery, he can't turn his neck. One of my go-to stories because it's freaking insane. Wedding videographer here. I think my favorite moment was when I was sitting at the miscellaneous table with all the randoms, and the girl next to me, the groom's ex, drunkenly admitted to sleeping with the groom a few months prior. I was at a wedding, I was a +1 for my date. The bride sat down drunk at our table and started talking to us. She then told me that she slept with her ex right before walking down the aisle. She screwed her ex in her wedding dress in the bridal suite. She then downed the last of my drink and went off to the dance floor. I was left speechless. I didn't know anyone but my date. Less than a year later, the bride and groom were divorced. He got so messed up at the reception, he had a fist fight with her cousin in the toilets over some white snow. He told all of the other cousins to F off. He hit on my aunt. He told my cousin's child to come back to him when she was 15 or 16, and he forgot to bring his own child to the hotel. I mean, I see absolutely no cracks in the foundation of those nuptials, and I'm roughly 28% sure that they may still be together. I was at a wedding when a phone went off during the ceremony, in the middle of exchanging vows. It was the groom's. He took the call. They're divorced now. One of my friends got married. Afterwards, she looked at me, crying, and said, "What did I do?" They were separated by the time the plane landed from their honeymoon. He was a good guy, she was a mess. The betta fish and the flower centerpieces lasted longer than the marriage. When they got married illegally in high school, two 16-year-olds from different states who had to lie on their certificate to get approved by the state. It was annulled when the father of the groom found out. I actually know a happy version of this. My high school English teacher's friend and her boyfriend took a bus to the next state over where you could get married at age 16, and so they eloped in secret and came out about it after they graduated, and have been married for over 40 years and counting. My grandmother got married at 16 to my grandfather, who was 19. World War II hit and he was leaving to fight. In her own words, "I wanted to be his wife, even just for a little, and he didn't want to die before we were a family." He survived, came home, and they were happily married until death did them part. Where to start? We were the bride's friends, the only people that showed up from her side for the wedding. The best man was the groom's white snow dealer who got dressed in a tux, the only one in a tux. The groom was high on white snow and giggled throughout the whole ceremony. The host of the party alternated between arguing with his wife in Russian and running up to us whenever he saw us in groups of 2 or more to tell us, "Don't smoke green herb. If she, the host's wife, won't let me smoke green herb in the house, then you guys can't either." Every time we grouped up. The morning after the wedding at campfire coffee, the new bride turned to the groom and asked, "Are you going to wear your ring every day? Because it kind of makes you look like a slur for a gay person." Those of us there side-glanced and took deep sips of coffee. I think it lasted 4 to 6 months. My brother's ex-wife. Throughout the exchange of vows, she was looking at everyone but my brother, making sure all eyes were on her. Later, she instructed the photographer, a family friend who was cheap, to mingle and get shots of people being happy. Within 10 minutes, she had summoned the photographer back, shouting, "Whose wedding is this? I meant get shots of people being happy for me." The groom showed up drunk after golfing with buddies all day. The bride in her vows said, "For richer," and left out the poorer. The bachelor party and the bachelorette party were in Vegas at the same time, across the hall from each other. The bride and groom got in a huge fight on the last night of the trip. When I was leaving, I said, "I'll see you guys at the wedding," to the groom, and he replied, "I'm not sure there's going to be one." There was a wedding, but they were divorced within 18 months, I believe. One of my friends was the best man at another friend of ours' wedding. His best man speech included this line, "I prepared some lines for tonight, but the groom sniffed them all in the bathroom." 3 months later, there was a divorce due to a white snow problem. At my boyfriend's sister's wedding, the groom got drunk before the vows and smoked green herb after the vows, was cross-faded as heck and made a fool of himself. When we went up to congratulate them after, she refused to be near him or take pictures with him. It was awkward. After the speeches, basically everyone left. Family was still around and they opened gifts. Someone gifted nice champagne and the groom tried to open it and dropped it and it shattered. Bride stormed off screaming. The groom got upset and started cussing out the air. They still went to their honeymoon together in Florida and she got pregnant almost immediately. Maybe 7 months into her pregnancy, she kicked him out because he slept with her roommate. They got divorced when their kid was 6 months old. But it's for the best. The guy is an absolute piece of crap and wasted a lot of their money by being selfish on their day. I worked at a museum that also doubled as a wedding venue in the summers. As part of the wedding package, the museum would stay open after hours for the guests only, so I just sit there and greet people basically. One wedding got particularly rowdy, almost everyone was drunk, people were jumping into the fountain, and someone hurled in said fountain. At one point, the bride is crying. Turns out the groom and one of his groomsmen were doing the deed upstairs in one of the bathrooms. A fight ensued between the groom and the father of the bride, and the cops were called because it got really ugly. Entertaining for me, but I felt so bad for the bride. You know, everything about this wedding just screams British upper class, and I can't quite put my finger on why. I just can't see it happening in any other country or level of society. Two friends of mine got married, and when they gave their vows, the guys started laughing at the part about being faithful. Whoops. I once watched a live stream of the wrong Vegas wedding. The link I was given for a friend's wedding was incorrect, and during the exchange of vows, the groom got to the part about being faithful and the bride visibly and audibly chuckled. It was hilarious to watch, but I bet they didn't last long. The groom and best man had a dancing routine for getting into the church ceremony, and they got nearly halfway through it, and I guess the groom felt they hadn't received much applause and wows from us, the attendees, and decided to go back to the entrance and start all over again. Why is no one having a good time? I specifically requested it. They were together since junior high and would break up and reconcile every 3 to 6 months. Everyone was just sick of it. Friends and family, and the marriage, at age 19 in the summer between freshman and sophomore year at college, was obviously an attempt to force the relationship to stick. It did not, but at least no kids got involved. The entire bridal party, including parents of the wedded couple, entered into a betting pool of how long the marriage would last at the wedding reception. I should say the bride and groom didn't participate, but everyone else did. That would have been glorious. If I recall correctly, the best man won. Price is Right rules at 14 months. The groom got into a fistfight with the father of the bride. Split after 4 months. Context, the groom and bride's dad, actually most people in these families if I'm honest, have pretty aggressive drinking problems. Father-in-law has always hated him. I wasn't around for what actually set it off, but it ended when the bride got in the middle, got an elbow in the eye, and the happy couple left for the night. This was in rural Canada. Not Letterkenny, but basically Letterkenny. I'd say the father-in-law won the fight though. The best man's speech was about how selfishly the groom had acted during a night out and telling him to treat marriage differently. The groom had a best woman instead of a best man. Nothing wrong with that, but her toast left the whole room in awkward silence because she was clearly in love with him. I wish I could remember the specifics, but it was all about how they were always together, all the late nights they'd spent together, etc. She was so tearful during it too. I'm not making it sound as bad as it was, but I assure you, it was bad. Portuguese wedding. A fistfight broke out at the head table during the reception, between two groomsmen. They were arguing about which of them had slept with the bride first. The groom was oblivious. He came home from work early one day 2 years later and caught her in bed with another man. I'm surprised it took that long. The midnight buffet was amazing, though. The most beautiful wedding I've ever been to ended in divorce. The venue was where the groom's father is buried, and he cried as he made his vows to the bride there. Turned out he'd been cheating on her for months and they divorced a while later. Something so repugnant about marrying someone you're cheating on practically over your father's grave. To date, it's the only wedding I've been to that ended in divorce. People who have been straight up fired on the spot. What happened? Chef here. Got fired because I sent out a steak that had char on it. The only char on it was grill marks. Alright lady, you just saved me a huge mess. Who would want a steak without char? When I worked as a server, we had a family that would routinely come in and want well-done steaks with no black marks. They sent several steaks back the first time they came, and eventually one of our cooks microwaved their steaks. They came back 2 or 3 times a month for the rest of the time I worked there, and happily ate microwaved steaks. A bunch of weirdos. Everyone was fired in one fell swoop. They'd decided to stop having our work-from-home department. It explained why I'd spent the last 2 weeks training people who they'd originally said were not eligible to work my job. I handed my boss my 2 weeks' notice and she ripped it in half and said, "Don't bother, you're done today." HQ wasn't too thrilled with her decision as they had to pay me a severance because of her hatred toward me. I came back to my summer job at an amusement park from missing 3 days with strep throat. I handed in my doctor's excuse and was fired for missing work. Apparently, to call off, you couldn't just talk to a manager, you had to talk to the department head, a person I'd never met with a phone number that had never been made available to me. Because I missed more than 2 days, it didn't matter that I had a note, because I was considered a no-call and no-show. The assistant manager I gave my excuse to handed me a letter back that said I had 10 minutes to clear out my locker and vacate the premises or they'd call the cops for trespassing. I was 16 in a state with very liberal employment laws and my mum retained a lawyer. I didn't win any money, but they ended up having to list me as rehirable in their system, and they paid a huge fine for essentially making it impossible for employees to call in sick. That's just ridiculous. Surely when you told your manager initially, the smart thing to do would be to give you that person's number, so they don't have to go through the effort of hiring someone else. I was one of 200 employees. They did not care. I was having trouble making sense of the harsh policy up until I read that last part. Of course, it makes sense that unskilled teens are easy to replace, but throwing away an otherwise reliable staff member for an explained absence would be really dumb in smaller businesses. Was working in the deli counter of a supermarket. I asked my closest manager if I could come next week on Thursday 2 hours later because I had a final exam that morning. Got fired on the spot. Don't bother coming into work tomorrow, you're fired. I was told Friday out of nowhere, we won't be needing your services anymore. After being told in November I would have a position into next year at the minimum. So that was a fun holiday gift. Same. Let go before Thanksgiving after 5 years at a company and negotiated my new raise with substantial documentation of my worth to the company. I was replaced almost immediately and suspect my raise was given to that individual. I witnessed the following. I worked at a camera store many years ago and we received a life-size cutout of Andre Agassi, the tennis player, who was promoting Canon cameras. We set up the cutout in the store, but our crotchety owner came in, didn't like it and told us to throw it out. So we put it away, but when the owner went out for lunch, we took it back out and proceeded to take a few goofy pictures in front of it. Then we put it back away. When the owner came back from lunch, he returned to his office and then 5 minutes later came rushing down the stairs, red-faced and screaming. We'd forgotten about the security camera and his secretary had snitched on us. "I told you to throw that thing out," he screamed. He then went into the back room, dragged Andre out, and started trying to tear the thing apart, bending the head back and forth. That cardboard is pretty tough though, and he was not a strong guy, so he just stood there for 30 seconds, furiously struggling with it. We were all trying to hold it in, but one of my co-workers couldn't help it and started laughing at the absurdity. Our owner heard it, whipped around and screamed, "You're fired! Get out of my store immediately!" We were all shocked, but the guy picked up his jacket, walked out, never to be seen again. I was fresh out of college at an IT contract-to-hire job. I came in on a Tuesday, sat down at my desk, and the boss came up behind me and told me I was fired. I sat there open-mouthed and then asked, why? He said that I was not a good fit for the company and that I had to leave. So I gathered my things and he stood there watching me, probably making sure I didn't steal anything, and escorted me out of the office. I found out later that because of the size of the company at the time, they were looking for a Tier 3 worker, but I was Tier 1. I told them this in the interview, but apparently they did not have the resources to train me. Well, joke's on them, I went through a month of unemployment and found an even better IT job, where I make a lot of money and work only half as hard as on that job. Well, that worked out well. Yes, in the end it did, but it was a whole month of not having a job. I applied to 5 jobs a day. I didn't have any interviews throughout the whole month of applying for jobs. I got called by a headhunter company that told me I could interview for the position I have now between Christmas and New Year's. I got the job and eventually got full employment, and my wife and I just had a baby when I got fired at the time. I told my manager at a fast food place that I was going to be looking for a new job and to not schedule me after this pay period. The next week I see my name on the schedule and ask her what the deal is. I told you I was going to get a new job and to not schedule me. Well, did you get a new job yet? No, but I'm still not sticking around for this one. Well, you know what, you can just not come back here now with that attitude. She sure showed me. It's the best thing in the world when idiots fire you when you're trying to quit. Cool, thanks for the unemployment checks. I was working for a small, family-owned restaurant. All the waitstaff and most of the kitchen staff were family or friends with the owner. I was hired as a waitress and I did okay, not great, not terrible. It was my first time being a waitress. One day, one of their regular customers came in who's a bit of a local celebrity. He apparently came in once or twice a week and tipped very well. Normally, the owner's daughter would take the table, but she was out sick, so I took them. I got an amazing tip from him, and he told the owner that he would like me to wait on them if I'm available in the future. The second he left, I was fired. What? For what reason, and what would they tell Mr. Fancy Pants when he came in again? I was told that they couldn't afford to keep me on as a waitress, basically. It was so many years ago that I can't remember the exact excuse she gave me. But her reaction when Mr. Fancy Pants requested me was more than enough context I needed. I never went back to the restaurant after that, but I learned it shut down a year or two later. I fired a person for disappearing on their first day of work after a couple of hours. We worked in the manufacturing plant and he took off to try and find some cute girl he knew that worked there. The guy was married and he asked, "What am I supposed to tell my wife?" I said, "Probably not the truth." Me and my friend were two young Irish lads working on rebuilding the Canary Wharf Tower in London, which had been blown up by some other Irish lads a year earlier, but that's another story. It was like Nakatomi Plaza. There were so many floors, if you didn't feel like working, you could just go to some random floor and hide out for a while. So me and my friend, both 18 years old, were hungover one morning. We went to the 23rd floor, where there was a comfortable couch and we lay there smoking green herb. Suddenly, the English foreman appears and fires us on the spot. As he was walking away, he says, "That was taking the mick, lads." Unfortunately, there was somewhat of a misunderstanding here. What he meant was that our behavior was so bad we crossed a line. However, in Ireland at the time, "that was taking the mick" meant "I'm only joking." So we continued working for another 3 or 4 hours before he came back and said, "I fired you this morning, what the hell are you still doing here?" For the record, the foreman in the original written story actually said, "You're taking the not safe for work word for urine." But we can't say that here, and the closest possible alternative the narrator could think of was, "You're taking the mick," which ironically is a pretty derogatory term for an Irish person, lending a whole new confusing angle to the foreman's statement. Sorry. Not me, but my brothers. He was valeting at a fancy beach club over the summer, and they hired a new kid from the area. The first car this new hire gets into, he backs into another car. My brother takes him to the side, tells him to calm down, the beach has insurance for this very reason, it's no big deal. Second car, the guy runs right into a parked car, which causes that car to smash into the one parked in front of it. My brother gives him $50 cash for the day of work and tells him not to come back. The summer between undergrad and graduate school, I was working in the customer service department of a Canadian department store. I got minimum wage plus $1 extra an hour because I was the only person capable of answering the phones in English and French. I asked for a Saturday off to attend my sister's high school graduation. They said, "What's more important to you, this job or the graduation?" I said, "Well, the graduation actually, particularly in the light of the fact that I was starting my second degree in another city about 10 weeks later." I got axed immediately. "Well, good luck finding a bilingual Albertan willing to work for minimum wage plus one, you stupid eggplant suckers." I was 15, I think. I was a lifeguard at a subdivision pool. Being the new guy and the young kid, I worked every weekend. Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday day. I'd already missed going to my grandparents a couple of times and my parents were taking a vacation. I asked off and was told that I couldn't go. My dad basically said, "You're going, I don't care." I told the boss this and she said, "You still have to work." I left with my parents, and when I got back there were a dozen messages on my parents' answering machine saying they couldn't open the pool because I wasn't there. She fired me 3 or 4 times that weekend. She was a bored housewife hired by the Homeowners Association to schedule the lifeguards who were mostly high school kids. She fired another for wearing a bikini. They didn't use her the next year, but by that point in time I was 16 and had a better job. They couldn't open the pool because I wasn't there? Not exactly a solid business plan if it counts on a 15-year-old having a 100% attendance at work. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was told that my position was being terminated, not just at our branch but company-wide, and was escorted back to my office to pack up my stuff. It wasn't dramatic or anything, but it was a shock. I didn't get to say goodbye to anybody. Just 2 days prior, I'd had my performance review and received glowing praise, while the entire time they knew they'd be letting me go in a couple of days. That's what bothered me the most. My first job out of college was for a very small dental insurance claims clearinghouse. The company had recently split from another company whose name was on the software that all the dentist offices used, so that was the name they recognized. The two companies were basically fighting over their client base. So my job was to call up all of their clients to remove the old software from the former partner and install all the new janky second-rate programs they'd cobbled together since the split. My job alternated between calling up customers to install the new software and train them on it, and troubleshooting the problems with the software and come up with workarounds, typically during training calls. Clients were typically finding out from me that the software was changing and I was supposed to insist that it was the same company, just different software. After almost a year of this, I was getting to the point where it felt just so awful to trudge my way into work, because I knew I'd spend the day getting yelled at by clients who were upset that their routines were changing. I spent a lot of my downtime complaining to my friends over my personal email about how awful it was. Probably not the best thing to do, but I was young. Well, one day I came back from lunch and found the door to my office closed and my boss standing there waiting for me. He showed me the emails he'd printed out from my personal email account with portions of conversations highlighted that he didn't like. I never used any names or revealed any company information, just my emotions while working there. He shoved the papers in my hands and said, "Explain this to me." I basically said I was having trouble with day-to-day grind, but he responded with, "I think it's time for you to find something else. Get out of here." Fine by me, I probably should have left before it got to that point, but hindsight is 20/20 and all that. I was 16 and it was my first job as a lifeguard in a neighborhood by my house. It was a very relaxed pool and we were never completely packed, and the kids that did frequent the pool seemed like me. As a lifeguard, I was often audited. The pool company owner's son would come around and test our lifeguard skills, and I passed twice that summer. Towards the beginning of August, he came around while our pool was shut down because of thunder and rain, and I kid you not, they audited me while it was storming. Me, young and stupid, not wanting to lose my job, said, "Okay," and in comes the owner's son's friend who probably weighed over 300 pounds. I'm 115. He jumped into the deep end and sank to the bottom, and I was supposed to save him. I tried and couldn't do it. He was dead weighting me, and I'm pretty sure he was pushing himself to the bottom, and rain was getting in my eyes and I was panicking because lightning. I came back up and I was fired on the spot. I got a call back later saying we'd love to have you if you took the training class again. The class was 10 hours, Friday through Sunday, 30 hours. I said no and hung up. Earlier this year, I was working in a chicken processing plant in the freezer section. We rotated through 4 tasks in this area: making boxes, packing boxes, labeling boxes, and stacking boxes. Now, I had no problem with this. It was easy, if boring work. What I did have a problem with was labeling the boxes. We had to stand in such a way that I was slightly bent at the waist the entire time, and for some reason this was causing a nerve to get pinched in my back. Tons of pain. I toughed it out for 2 weeks. After that, I couldn't take it anymore. I explained this to my boss. Told her that I'd gladly do a double on packing the chicken, everyone hated that part, if I could just not label the boxes anymore. Or I'd take a double making boxes or stacking boxes, didn't matter to me. Nope, instead I was fired and told to vacate the property. They wouldn't even let me sit in the visitor area until my ride arrived. Ended up spending 30 minutes standing in 27 degrees Fahrenheit weather on the side of the road waiting on my ride. Yes, I'm aware of the fact that firing me in such a way was illegal, and no, I couldn't draw unemployment. I'd only worked there for 2 weeks. Officially, I was fired for refusing to perform assigned duties. As for the company in question, Wayne Farms in Georgia. I won't give any more information than that, but if you live in Georgia, there's a good chance any chicken you've eaten from Zaxby's, Burger King, Bojangles, Popeyes, or Chick-fil-A has passed through one of their plants. I'm a security guard now. Pay isn't as good, but it's a lot less stressful. Plus, I no longer eat chicken, especially not fast food chicken. Not after what I saw in that place. If you're in the southern states, do not eat fast food chicken. You know, I'm not sure I've read a single account from the people who work at these meat plants who say that they didn't end up not eating that food or becoming vegan afterwards. That should probably be a warning for the rest of us. Ironically, I was having a really positive day at work. I'd been there about 9 months and was starting to really hit my stride. I'd made some really positive improvements with production process and workflow. The company was better for my time there. My work actually resulted in them being able to eliminate an entire position, saving the company around 20 to 30k a year. Around 3 p.m., I'm called into our small conference room and told that I'm being fired for saying that I hate this freaking job and that I wasn't willing to go back into the warehouse and help out in the mornings. So I was caught completely off guard, and the fact that this was coming from the owner meant I knew that there was nothing I could say. But I still defended myself by saying there was no way I would have said that I hated my job. But still, I was guided to my desk where I packed my stuff in shock and headed out. I remained in contact with one of my coworkers, and about a year later it came out that the same thing was tried on her. Turns out the operations manager was a nut, and having the ear of the owners, she would straight up lie to them and get people fired. Why? I still don't know, but they knew the second coworker much longer and better than myself. So when operations manager told them what that coworker supposedly was doing, they talked to her directly and determined that the OM was lying. This time, the OM got canned. There are days I wish they'd still have the stones to reach out to me and apologize. It's been 5 years now though, so that won't be happening. The experience really shook me and I can still see the effects to this day. That was my first real job out of college, and I'd decorated my little office with personal items, some drawings my daughter had done, and other things. Now I refuse to decorate with anything personal, and I keep the bare minimum of personal articles in my office. Getting canned and having to stand there and be watched while I had to collect all of these personal artifacts was embarrassing and humiliating. I don't plan on being fired again, but if needs be, I can grab 1 or 2 things, tops, and walk to my car. I forgot to pay for a hot dog I ate the previous day of work. I had the money to pay, and I would have if they'd asked me to. It genuinely slipped my mind, but the manager was treating me as a serious thief. Kinda sucked, but the job was pretty terrible too. Retail usually is. I should probably clarify that some of my coworkers had had this happen to them before I was fired, but the difference being was that they got warnings. It doesn't bother me much because that manager was actually pretty scummy in the long run, and she lost the majority of her employees about a week after I was fired. 17, still in high school. I was hired as a custodian for a hotel and was asked to clean the pool. I was asked to backflush the system to clean the filters, which involves turning the pumps off and closing pipe valves. Well, there's about 20 valves, but only 3 needed to be closed. I thought I did them right. I went to open the filter on the pump and boom! The cap shot off and water started dumping out of the pump. The pool maintenance room is in the basement next to the pool, so it'll dump the whole pool if it's not stopped. I panicked and tried forcing the cap back on. Ran upstairs and through the hotel completely soaked. It was the weekend, so my boss was off. Took him about 20 minutes to reach and get him to the hotel to help me with the system. In the end, there was probably a foot of water flooding the floor. It damaged the water heaters, got into the furnace, maintenance office, and phone system. Not sure on the damage cost, but it had to be in the hundreds of thousands, if not over $1 million. I was promptly fired by the hotel manager. I hated my last job. My coworkers were all right, but the guy over my department was a real butthole. Well, the time finally came after many years. I got an offer and of course I said yes. I'd been plotting this moment. From my backpack, I pull a sympathy card that I'd been holding onto for a while. On the front, "In memories we find comfort, in time we find peace." On the inside, "So sorry for your loss." I sign my name, add a date for now plus 14 days. Hand it to the boss man. Now, I know for a fact that boss man would find it hilarious if this had happened to literally any other boss person in the company. But he had several sticks up his butt, so he fired me, told me, "Hands off the computer," yelled for a bit, insulted me several times, then walked me out the door. The company lawyer called in short order, "We've accepted your 2 weeks' notice. We don't require you to serve those 2 weeks, but you'll get paid for it." I guess the whole "you need to learn about your actions have consequences" bullcrap that the bossman tried to pull when I submitted my notice kind of backfired on him. The bossman in question had a habit of yelling at people in exit interviews. I like to think they didn't schedule one for me because he knew I wouldn't put up with it. I was 16 and working as a dishwasher at a summer tennis camp at an exclusive tennis club. The owner of the club was upset that I hadn't taken all the trash out. I explained to him that the dumpster was full and overflowing. He told me that I needed to climb into the dumpster and jump up and down on the trash to create more room for it. I said that I wouldn't do it. He told me that he wouldn't ask me to do anything that he wouldn't do himself, so I said, "Fine, I want to see you climb into the dumpster and start jumping up and down." He fired me on the spot. For those of you that agree with the owner, you should really check up on how OSHA and the health department would feel about this. What was the most embarrassing public tantrum you've seen a grown adult throw? My first job in high school, working at an ice cream parlor. We had 3 sizes, 2 scoops, 1 scoop, and child size. Why it wasn't just large, medium, and small? Don't ask me. One day, a guy that had to be well into his 80s slowly walks in. It was an early afternoon before the typical rush at night, so he was able to walk right up to the counter and stare at our board of flavors, toppings, etc. You can see on his face he's getting irate for some reason. He's pacing quicker. Here and there you can see his mouth open to talk, but he doesn't. And then finally he speaks. "I want your smallest ice cream, but it's absolutely demeaning that I have to order a child size. I'm a grown man. I have children and grandchildren of my own." This goes on, and I'm unable to get a word in edgewise. He keeps going, and finally I interrupt. "How about this? I just give you the smallest size we have, call it a small, and charge you for our cheapest ice cream." For some reason, this answer wasn't acceptable. He goes back into his rant about being a grown man, and is now screaming at me about how insulted he was. I again reiterate, I can just give you a small ice cream, but no, anything beneath an institutional change wasn't going to stop this guy. He just kept going. Now other customers are starting to walk in and just watch him rant, screaming, "Do I look like a child?" and things like, "I have grandchildren older than you." Meanwhile, he's refusing to order something else, or just consider the smallest size as small rather than child size, which was written on the board, and won't leave either. The owner now comes in from the back to see what's going on because there's now a long line. This has been going on a good 10 minutes. As is usual in these situations, the owner introduces himself as the owner, which prompted the response, "Good, your employee insulted me." As the man explained how I insulted him, the owner pivoted to the same thing I did. "Can we just call it a small and be on with it?" This made things worse. Finally, after him screaming at the owner for a few more minutes, the owner says, "You came into my shop, don't like the name I used for my ice cream sizes, berated one of my employees, and are berating me. Please stop using the phrase disrespected because you're the only one being disrespectful." Usually, in internet stories, this is when the writer puts, "and everyone clapped," but no one did. The situation was just too awkward for them to acknowledge that they were paying attention. The old man went to talk and the owner cut him off and just said, "Let me be frank. Tell me what will make you happy and I'll do it." The old man stood there for a few seconds and just angrily said, "I'll never come back here again," and walked back out the door. In conclusion, I got screamed at because the ice cream shop I worked at called a small a child size. In food service, I met so many customers who stormed out over stupid crap claiming they'd never return, but sadly, most of them did. Complaining is what makes them happy, and people in customer service put up with it longer than most. Yep. Is this the same in retail, or is it mainly a hospitality thing? Because I feel like I encountered enough of these for several lifetimes. I help my cousin out on jobs where he gets in over his head. One time our uncle went out for sandwiches and got them for the whole crew. My grown, 45-year-old cousin had a freaking meltdown on the job site and started throwing crap because his sandwich had pickles on it. He broke the windows of his own vehicle and destroyed about $1,000 worth of materials over pickles. We're both on the spectrum, but he was never disciplined as a child and allowed to lash out, so he does it frequently. This is the biggest one I've ever seen anyway. I used to work as a manager at a wings place. A lady and a guy got incredibly upset at us when they asked for their order and we didn't have it. "We've been waiting for 30 minutes. How isn't it done?" "We don't have any orders in the last week with that name. I don't know what to tell you." "Well, we paid for it." "Would it be under a different name perhaps?" "Oh yeah, our son ordered it. Try Jack Smith instead." Not actually his name, but you get it. "Okay, that's not showing up either. How about you show me your receipt and I can look up the confirmation number?" The girl hands me the receipt. The son ordered their food under the name EA Sports, It's in the Game. When I let them know what it was actually under and got the food for them, they legit were screaming at me and trying to say it was my fault. The guy started throwing chairs at other customers and hit the windows with a large rock. Police were called and they left. Eventually the guy came back 3 hours later to yell at me and my crew more, and we called the police a second time. I pray for that son and I hope he's okay. His parents seemed a little off their rockers. I once had someone refuse to give me a name for an order, not food-related. The job was expected to take roughly half an hour. And they were like, "Can't you just remember us?" I said I might not be here when they get back, just give me any name. So they clearly made one up, something like John Smith. They came back hours later, even though they promised to be back in half an hour, and gave me their real name instead of the fake one. Then started getting crappy when I couldn't find it. I remembered who they were eventually, but I thought it might be a good lesson in why you need to remember your damn names. I've posted this before, but I witnessed some lady having a full-blown tantrum in a Culver's drive-thru. I was on the headset that day, and when she pulled up to the order screen, I asked for her order. She snapped back that she wasn't ready, so I told her to go ahead and order when she was ready. For whatever reason, that set her off because again she snapped back and said, "You know what, just for that, I will take my time." She sat silently in her car for a few minutes and I could hear the cars behind her starting to honk. The car directly behind her must have caught on to her just sitting there refusing to order, so he pulled around her, drove up to my window and asked if he could order directly from me. The other cars in line must have noticed as well, because when I handed him his receipt, they began to pull in front of the lady refusing to order and started a new line at my window ordering directly from me. The lady who refused to order went absolutely bananas. She laid on her horn, grabbing her steering wheel and started thrashing around, shaking her car violently, screaming at the top of her lungs that people were cutting in front of her. She eventually drove around to my drive-thru window, gave me the finger and did a burnout. I think that was the biggest tantrum I've seen an adult throw. I love imagining these people relaying stories like this to their loved one. "You won't believe how that B-word at the window told me to, checks notes, order when I was ready." Unfortunately, my grandma is one of these. She, of course, changes the tone of everything, so instead of, just let me know when you're ready to order, it's, "'Kay, let me know when you're ready," eye roll. A longtime parishioner entered church on Sunday and saw a new young family sitting in her pew. She told them that they'd have to move as they were sitting in the pew she'd occupied for worship services for many years. As I once described, when they refused to relocate, the lady said, in full voice for all to hear, that she wouldn't stand for their insubordination and that she was leaving and taking her substantial pledge with her. I mean, Jesus lost his crap completely at people trying to hustle outside of his dad's temple, and yet 2,000 years later there's a massive sect of Christians that missed the memo. I do business with a local AT&T store. I was getting a phone for our company and this guy was trying to get an iPhone for his teenage daughter. I'm not sure what went on, but apparently they didn't have the exact phone she wanted and they were going to have to order it. That wasn't good enough, so he started having a full-blown temper tantrum saying the sales associate was ruining his daughter's birthday gift. The manager comes out to see what's going on and there's another customer who's in there and this guy is like 6'5", goatee, bald head, roided up with a full sleeve tattoo, and he says, "Hey, calm down." And the angry dad said, "Who said that?" The bald giant said, "I did," in a very angry voice, and the dad just put his head down and shut up. The manager was trying to see what was going on, and the dad was like, "We're gonna go now." I wish I could say everyone clapped, but the sales associate was extremely grateful. Years ago when I was waitressing, a kid threw garbage into our potted plant and I made the kid remove it. Then the mom tried to yell at me, but a little old Israeli lady got up and told her off. This old lady was tiny, but steely. Like you could believe she had fired a machine gun during the war. The soccer mom skedaddled out of there. When I used to work at Best Buy, a woman was absolutely teed off and threatening to sue for false advertisement because a Kindle case was $2 cheaper than what was listed in the ads in the Sunday paper. Okay, so my early question about whether this happens as much in retail seems to have been definitively answered by a few other posts now. Hospo and retail slaves, unite! My own mother. We were getting food at a food truck. They must have pressed the wrong button or something because she got charged for $11 when it should have been $10. My mum immediately blows up about it, demanding they give her back her $1. The cashier apologized profusely and said it was a mistake. They got the manager or owner or whatever to come over and help refund the money. The whole time they're trying to figure the computer out, my mum is ranting and raving about how they were overcharging her on purpose to pocket the money since she didn't tip. She calls them thieves and criminals. I straight up told her, "I'll give you $1 right now if you stop," and of course she says it's all about the principle. After they fix it, we leave. She keeps ranting to me about it, so I make up an excuse to leave. Later in a text, she tells me she went to the nearest police station after that and made a report against them. I very much wish I could have seen the police officer's reaction. I bet they were dying laughing inside and probably threw her report away the moment she left. This woman is 40 years old. What in the actual frick? Frick, you just reminded me of a client. I work in an animal hospital that called and left a message for the doctor she just saw stating, "I found some white fur on me, and I know it didn't come from my dog because he has black fur. I find this absolutely unacceptable, and I will be leaving a message with the hospital manager." Neither of us heard anything from the hospital manager. The last time I was at Heathrow Airport, I witnessed a woman in her 30s, dressed in business attire, literally kicking and screaming because they wouldn't let her take an open carton of juice through the security checkpoint. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My sister had the worst temper of anyone I've ever known. We were at the drive-thru at McDonald's. She had ordered McNuggets with barbecue sauce. When we got to the window, she was handed the nuggets but no sauce. She just sat there staring expectantly at the cashier. Finally, she said, "Well, are you going to give me my sauce or what?" The cashier turned to the side, away from the window, and my sister said, "Excuse me, are you deaf? Where's my sauce?" The cashier said, "I'm getting it." The cashier handed over fistfuls of sauce packets and didn't do it in a friendly way. So my sister threw half of the packets directly at the face of the cashier and called her the B word. Then she drove out of there like a bat out of hell. I absolutely hated going anywhere with my sister because she regularly caused a scene over the dumbest things. I have a friend that's similarly embarrassing no matter where we went. The hardware store won't cut the eaves shorter.
The frick is wrong with you? Don't you know these won't fit in my fricking car? The ice cream place didn't have any hot fudge ready? What kind of fricking idiots are you people? I stopped hanging out with her because of that.
I was at Friendly's with a group of friends. One of them brought their boyfriend with them. We all got our treats and sat down. This dude comes up to us and says, "Do you think I should complain about the slushie not having enough syrup?" We all kind of agree that sure, it's okay to see if they can do something to fix it. He goes up there and talks to the girl at the register. I couldn't make out everything, but essentially she told them that they made it the way they were told and she couldn't do anything. He takes what remains of his slushie and slams it on the counter, getting it everywhere. He yells at her that she can take the drink back then. A manager tells him that he's got to go. We were all just in shock. I didn't even know where to put my face, I was so embarrassed. Him, on the other hand, he wasn't ashamed at all. My friend defends her boyfriend, saying that it wasn't a big deal and they should really have fixed his drink. Customer service for a doctor's office credit card program. Spent 45 minutes trying to help a doctor change his password. I couldn't actually help them because every time I would tell them to do something specific, they would do this stress, sigh, sobbing kind of thing. Would remind me every 30 seconds that he went to school for 8 years so he wouldn't have to deal with this. Mind you, he was clearly in his 20s and 30s, not an old guy that has an excuse to not know how to do it. After the 45 minutes of this rotation, he finally passed the phone to his receptionist. We shared a laugh over his attitude, and we reset the password in 30 seconds. As someone else who's worked tech support for doctors' offices, I feel this pain so deeply in my soul. I honestly have begun to wonder if you can't keep up with technological advancements required for your job, like EMRs and password requirements, how in the heck am I supposed to believe you can keep up with medical advancements too? Yikes. I've seen a stranger throw a tantrum because he didn't know what to order for breakfast. Asked for input, but for some reason got angry when our cashier suggested a breakfast sandwich. My uncle threw a tantrum and stormed off to bed because he was the first person out when we were playing Monopoly. The following night, he again was the first person out, but instead of storming off to bed, he sat there and sulked because, and I quote, "Last night I didn't get any. I wonder why." First out in Monopoly is better than winning, actually. I sell safety equipment to major companies. You have to have paperwork to get discounts for this stuff. I've had multiple grown men come in, tell me they work for X and they want the company discount. I tell them I need their forms and they begin throwing a fit. They throw around the whole, "Do you know who I am?" bit, and get even madder when I do not in fact know who they are. If you were such a big shot, why don't you have the form? At the Burning Man entry gate, we take special delight in making sure that the privileged jerks follow the rules. Since we're the ones in control, it's more like malicious bureaucracy than malicious compliance, but the stories are similar enough. Most of these morons are no-name DJs and artists. No, we will not call the boss of Burning Man because you said you're friends with her. So we have a saying, "Do you know who I think I am?" I don't know who thought that trying to heft around your minor celebrity status to a bunch of free spirits in the desert would go well, but they fully deserved all the sarky treatment they received. The one I will always remember happened over 20 years ago. Long story slightly shorter, and this was back before September 11th, a man and his girlfriend came to the gate at the airport. There was some mix-up where the girlfriend had given her luggage to the skycap, but hadn't checked in for the flight, so she didn't have a boarding pass. The flight was oversold and there was no seat available for her. It was a flight to Washington, D.C., and it was the last one out until tomorrow morning. When this guy finds out she can't get on the plane, he goes ballistic. He literally starts screaming at the gate agent. In a post-September 11th world, I'm reasonably certain he would have been arrested or at least kicked out of the airport. He's going on and on about how important he is and that he's a member of some platinum club. How dare his girlfriend not get on the plane? People with the cheap tickets should be booted to accommodate her. He'll reach out to the corporate offices, etc. Basically, he was making a huge public butt out of himself. Well, it wasn't this gate agent's first rodeo either. She let him scream himself out, and when he took a breath, she looked at him and said, "There is exactly one person who can get your girlfriend onto the plane, and that person is me. I suggest you take a seat, be patient, and I'll see what I can do." He started going off again, and she said louder than him, "I will see what I can do." Finally, he sat down. She made some phone calls, typed on her computer, and finally came over the loudspeaker saying, "This flight is overbooked. Do we have any customers willing to take a later flight for X amount of flight vouchers?" Silence. She asked a couple more times, raising the ante, and again, silence. Now, I had nowhere to be until Tuesday, so I could have easily taken a flight the next day, but I'll be darned if that idiot is going to get his way. Seems like everyone else there felt the same way. No one took the offer. Eventually, she called the two of them over and said, "I'm sorry, I've offered the max amount of vouchers I can and no one's taking it. I need to start boarding now. If she needs to get out tonight, she can try another airline or I can put her on tomorrow's flight right now." The guy was like, "Frick you," and walked off with his very embarrassed girlfriend in tow as he was muttering under his breath, "Bye-bye." If the guy hadn't been such a first-class prick to the gate agent who literally had nothing to do with the situation, she could have taken my seat and been on her way. Oh man, I've been dying for a question like this. Does anyone remember the Rick and Morty Szechuan sauce release at McDonald's a few years ago? Anyways, my friend loves the show but couldn't go due to work, so I went to try and get some for him. There was a line of people who'd been waiting for a while. Apparently, some of the workers gave them out to people in the drive-thru, so they were all out and all they had were posters. A couple of guys were throwing complete temper tantrums and screaming and cussing out the workers for not properly handing out the sauce packets. After screaming at them for a good 10 to 15 minutes, the guy demands a poster. The worker says they have to purchase a meal in order to get the poster, and the guy flips out again and orders a meal in a really condescending tone. As soon as he gets the meal and his poster, he takes his meal and starts throwing it against the walls, and then takes his two children with the poster and walks away while cussing at them on the way out. The next few guys in the line do the same thing. They only had like 5 to 8 posters. The vast majority of people towards the front all threw baby tantrums and threw their food and drinks everywhere, making a huge mess. Luckily, I recorded a decent amount of it. Absolutely insane how childish these grown men were acting over a fricking sauce packet. Most of them had their children with them too. It was honestly just so insane, I couldn't believe it. I worked at McDonald's in high school. There were a few, but one stands out above all of the others. It's lunchtime and we're busy. The Filet-O-Fish is not a particularly popular sandwich, so we only ever had a couple of pieces of fish ready to avoid having to throw them away. A guy comes into the drive-thru and orders 4. I kid you not, as his order is popping up on our screen, the whole timer for the 2 fish we had already made was going off. We have to fry 2 regardless, so we decide to just make all 4 fresh. The manager apologizes and tells the guy to pull forward and wait. He's not happy, but he does. Meanwhile, we keep serving people who didn't order fish. After the third car or so gets their order and leaves, the guy is in the lobby demanding to see the manager. He wants to know why he's still waiting since we're clearly serving other people. The manager explains that none of these people ordered fish and that the fish will be ready in a few minutes. Apologizes again for the wait. The guy is teed off. He starts yelling about how it's ridiculous that we have no fish ready. The manager explains how the hold timer went off and she wasn't about to serve anyone expired food. Since we had to make a couple anyway, we're making you all 4 fresh. Most people would be happy that they weren't served questionable food, but not this guy. The guy went ballistic. He started yelling about how we should have served him the 2 we had, and we shouldn't serve anyone else until his order, blah blah blah, you get the idea. Then he threatens my manager with physical violence if he's not served his order right now. She tells him he needs to go out to his car right now or she'll be calling the police. The guy storms out of the restaurant, slamming the door so hard behind him that he broke it. A few seconds later, we hear screeching tires as he leaves the parking lot without his fish. My father. Probably more to do with the fact that I was related to him and it ruined a day trip, but here it is. So at the time, we, mother, father, teenage brother, and preteen me, lived close to a great beach and there was a small amusement park next to it. A variety of issues meant going there as a family for a day out was a special treat, and something that was highly anticipated. We hadn't decided if we'd do the beach, doing some boogie boarding, or the amusement park, water slide, and crazy golf. So we took the boards with us, but in the end decided not to use them. This was very bad. My mother was a deficient human being for bringing them with us and committing the crime of bringing unnecessary items on a day trip. In the car park, in full view of everyone, there he was, screaming. He threw his hat on the ground and was jumping up and down, clenching his fists as if he were having a vertical seizure. Of course, we knew not to say anything because he would just become violent, and we had to walk on eggshells for the rest of the day. I have since gone no contact with him, and he was shocked, convinced that someone had manipulated me into it, because he never did anything that would make someone not want to be in a relationship with him. What is the most awesome way you saw someone quit their job? One of my cooks calmly walked to the ice machine in the middle of the shift. I didn't think too much of it until he came back with a bucket of ice and dumped it in the fryers. The entire kitchen went dead silent for what seemed like forever. Then all of a sudden, the low boiling noise started. Within seconds, the fryers are throwing boiling water all over the place. About 30 seconds later, they catch on fire, and the fire suppression system goes off. It sprays a 6-inch layer of foam everywhere. The guy walks to the microphone in the kitchen and calmly says, "F all of you, I'm out." We had to shut down for 2 days to clean up the mess, and the cook was arrested and sued. It was epic, but it couldn't have been worth it in the end. Working at a movie theater just kept popping popcorn, like overflowing onto the ground. Didn't even look away until the manager said, "You're fired." I worked at a movie theater in high school. One of the other kids who worked there was getting super sick of our mostly insufferable, greasy-haired, limping whale of a boss. So one day, our boss asked him to clean out all the garbage in the back room, and he drops his pants to the floor, throws 2 birds in the air, and quits. Then he walked out from behind the counter, through the lobby full of guests, to the parking lot, with his pants around his ankles and his middle fingers in the air. Most hilarious crap I've ever seen. Friend worked at a major shopping center in a deli. It was his last day anyway, so he wasn't exactly trying to get fired. He changed one of the signs on the trays of meat to "hand-strangled veal." Not one person noticed all day. I had just walked into a Taco Bell about a minute before where someone quit on the spot and freaking trashed the place. I mean food and cups and bags and drinks all over the place behind the counter. One worker girl was frantically on the phone with the police, just freaking out and saying, "He trashed the place! He trashed the place!" Needless to say, I did not get my bean burrito. Worked at a restaurant a few years ago that was the pits. It was a terrible place to work, but the tips were great, so I stuck with it. One guy had had enough of it after his paycheck bounced, so he went into the manager's office, looked her square in the eye and said, "I quit, you frickin' B-word," and placed his apron on the desk. As he was walking through the kitchen, he took one of the sacks of flour we used to make dough with, threw it over his shoulder and said, "This is mine," and walked out. Although the man's defiance is admirable, some of the follow-up questions make a valid point about his choice of plunder. One commenter summarizes the points nicely. "If you're going to appropriate food in lieu of your paycheck, I suggest you raid the filet mignon and the saffron, not the flour. There's nothing worse than getting a paycheck and it gets fricking denied. I usually just take my check straight to the bank my boss uses and get cash, then put it in my bank that's further away later on in the week. I'll never forget sitting at the drive-thru and the lady coming back to the window and saying, 'Sir, your boss doesn't have enough money in his account to cover this.'" Some background first. I worked at a company that had an owner who was not paying people for their final 2 weeks when they resigned. I was one of those who got stiffed, later got my pay when the state intervened. After I quit, a former employee of mine, a tech writer working on a big project from his home office, decided that the missed and late paydays and horrible treatment from the owner was enough. He decided to quit without notice. He gathered up all the equipment that the company gave him and he took it into the office. He dropped it on the floor and said, "I'm out, B-words." One of the directors asked him if he was going to be available for any transition or other information exchange, to which he replied, "When you pay all the people who've left and still haven't received their pay, I will transition knowledge." To my knowledge, that transition never occurred, yet he received his final 2 weeks' pay and unpaid vacation without issue. Go figure. The Philly Run. A friend worked in Northern Virginia at an office job he hated. On the day he decided he was done, he clocked in, left, drove to Philadelphia over 2.5 hours for a cheesesteak, returned to the office job and clocked out. A bartender I worked with had a really bad run, was a little bit strung out on white snow and life in general, but anyways, we had this really bad day at work and this woman kept pestering us about the service. Eventually, he just took the money she was holding to get our attention, got his lighter out from his pocket, set fire to the bill and held it in front of her while saying something like, "F you, you stupid fricking B-word." Then he just left and never came back. He's kinda crazy, so I'm happy he left. I didn't work with him, but I'm reminded of the JetBlue male flight attendant who popped the emergency exit slide, cracked open 2 beers, drank them on the way down the slide, and left. When the police arrived at his house, he was in the middle of doing the deed with his wife. I guess there comes a point when enough is enough. I like to think I can drink fast, but 2 beers on a slide? I need to shake this man's hand, or probably give him a fist pound through the prison glass. I was shopping at a Walmart one night, probably around 8 or 9, for some laundry detergent. As I was looking for the right aisle, a navy blue collared shirt went soaring from cash register 11 to aisle 14. I turned to my right and saw a shirtless black man with a 90s Mike Tyson fade, a golden Jesus necklace, and a chest tattoo that read Stu Manchu. After watching his shirt slowly float to the ground, he proceeded to go to his register's intercom and say, "Attention all customers, this N-word just quit." After putting his high-flying middle finger down, he ducked underneath his register, went ahead and pulled out a folded razor scooter with green wheels. He assertively put on his JanSport backpack, pried open the scooter, flung the base of it around his hip, and with one rooster swipe of the shiny Walmart floor, he went from 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. The automatic doors diverged like the Red Sea, and the man, without any regret, scooted his way into the arms of unemployment. Been working at Walmart for a good 7 years. The only time anyone actually quit in a way to be any type of story happened about 3 or so years ago. He was a CSM, or a customer service manager, and was at the return desk trying to help these two real annoying ladies. They were trying to return something with no receipt. Problem besides the missing receipt was you could tell the item was bought many, many years ago. So once he declined it, they started to cause a scene, making fun of him for working at Walmart and saying he wasn't going anywhere in life, etc., etc. What they didn't know was Walmart was actually his second job, and he actually worked for some government branch. After about 15 minutes of their hazing, he quietly removed his badge, came around the counter, removed his shirt, got on the intercom, yelled he quit, then looked at the two ladies and asked, "Now that I don't work here anymore, would you like to go outside like you suggested earlier?" They were shocked and just standing there. Then he just replied with, "I freaking thought so, you stupid hood rats," and then just walked out. While I was working a crappy dishwashing job part-time, one of the other guys who did the shift before me was pretty scummy. Imagine your stereotypical British chav, and it was exactly him. The big dishwashing machine was a little excitable. It would blast water towards the opening hatch so hard that it would leak pretty badly even when sealed shut. So imagine the look of surprise on my face when I walked in for my shift to see a buck-toothed chav, completely undressed, being blasted by scalding hot water from head to toe from an open dishwasher, yet still wearing a backwards-facing cap that was surviving the ordeal. He looked at me and I managed to decipher the opening sentence to, "Done with this crap." Still undressed and soaked, he confidently strode to his Mini Cooper and drove home. I never saw him again after that. Does being a real prick count? I knew a guy who quit Dairy Queen by unplugging all of the freezers and leaving. At my last job, I was working for a telecommunications company which essentially required us to work tons of overtime. I averaged 85 hours a week over a 5-year period. The money was amazing, but the job burned people out. There was one guy, John, who was married to this awful woman. She was clearly cheating on him, she wouldn't work, but he didn't want to leave her because of their kids. As a way to hide from the rest of his life, he was there for 16 years and was an exemplary employee. One day, the guy comes into work dressed in flip-flops, a Hawaiian shirt, and shorts. Dress code was slacks and a company button-down shirt. He drops his set of company keys and his company phone at the manager's desk, was an open bullpen so everyone could see, and said, "Well, the old lady got killed in a car accident yesterday, so F this job and F all of you. I quit." He then gave the boss's boss, who was a real butthole, a 2-finger salute and walked out. He was the longest tenured employee they'd ever had. Everyone knew his situation and we all felt bad for him. The boss still gave him a good reference because, as he explained it, everyone has a breaking point. John reached his many years ago. He was given a gift from God in that car accident. Why would I take that away from him? My old boss was a cool dude who smoked a lot of green herb to deal with the stress of that job. That is grim as all heck, but I'm happy for John strolling into the sunset. Also, my long complaint about hospitality hours rarely reached 85 hours a week, and I was done with that after a year. Don't know how these guys blue-pilled themselves into 5 years of that. Co-worker was on his last weekend shift and had already landed a job elsewhere. He never got along with management, but he did his job very well. Call center type of work with 24/7, 365-day support. We have 4 people that work on the weekends, and you have to scan your ID badge and then immediately punch in your 4-digit code. The doors were so scumbaggy that people on the weekday shift would just enter through the main lobby rather than fight the doors. Well, according to his story and the security tapes that support his story, it went down like this. He arrived at 7:50 a.m. and tried to punch in his card. Failed the first time, no big deal. Second attempt was a fail. After his 5th try, he said he became so enraged that he decided to roundhouse kick the keypad. This put a huge hole in the wall. He calmly reached into the wall and scanned his badge and punched in his code. The door opened perfectly. He worked Saturday and Sunday, came in Monday to pick up his check and was promptly told that it was being held for damages to the property. Funniest story ever, especially watching the tapes. It should be noted that he'd had McDonald's for breakfast and had to drop the biggest deuce ever. So waiting for the door to cooperate was apparently not an option. In conclusion, co-worker freaked out at the keypad and roundhouse kicked it. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was bartending at the time. One of our bosses had bushy red hair. One night our general manager told him he needed to get a haircut. He proceeded to get quite drunk after work and showed up with a shaved head and a Ziploc bag full of his hair, which he slid under the door to the office. This happened at a Best Buy I was working at right before I started. The story goes that a woman was at the Geek Squad desk yelling at one of our agents, telling him how bad he was at his job and just being a general B-word. After about 15 to 20 minutes or so of him trying to explain what was wrong with her computer and putting up with this behavior, he finally just snapped. My general manager was standing next to him, so he turned to my GM and said, "I quit," then turned back to the lady with enough volume so that the warehouse team could hear him clearly on the opposite side of the store and yelled directly in her face, "Ma'am, you're such a frickin' C-word," and then left forever. Legend has it that in certain parts of the store you can still hear the C-word echoing around the walls. Another time, as an assistant manager of a retail outlet, I was passed up for manager yet again, and a drinking buddy of the regional manager got the manager job with zero experience. I'd already been running the store alone for a few months since the last manager quit. I made sure I had all the keys. The next morning I ordered an Egg McMuffin meal and a coffee, and I sat and watched the entire mall open except for our store. A few hours later, I got a call. "Yep, I know the store is closed." "I know, because it can't possibly open because I quit. I'm watching the store right now. Definitely closed. They lost most of the day's sales. Screw them." Not really ballsy, but by far one of the funnier things I've ever seen. I was sitting in McDonald's enjoying some chicken nuggets sometime at night when one of the workers starts yelling and tromping around. He tires himself out pretty quickly and leaves with an adamant, "Screw all y'all." Not 5 minutes later, he walks back in and says, "I bet y'all didn't think I was coming back." He keeps bragging about his stellar achievement and then slowly slips in to one of the workers. "Hey, what time are you off? I need a ride." I lost it at that. In conclusion, McDonald's worker quits, leaves in a storm, then walks back in asking for a ride when he can't find one. In all fairness, not many people can work at McDonald's and afford a car. A man and a woman I worked with were fraternizing. There was a no fraternizing clause in our contract. I knew them both fairly well. They told me, and I've seen them together outside of work. It was a stupid clause, but it paid well. Anyway, company meeting, talking about new directions and how they'll start enforcing certain things more strictly. Manager asks for more questions or comments. The guy raises his hand, the manager called on him. "F you and F your rules, I quit." He stood up, walked over to the woman and kissed her, turned and gave the manager a finger and walked out. I started clapping. No one joined in. Was at the trash collection facility disposing of an old sofa and maybe a dead working girl when the guy driving one of the blue recycling trucks got into an argument with his boss. The boss told him after he dumped his load of recyclables, he needed to park the truck in front of the shop and come collect his last paycheck because he was fired. I couldn't believe the boss's audacity to expect him to finish working after he had already been fired. The guy flipped the handle on the truck while the boss was walking away, pulled the pins on the tailgate, and dumped 4 tons of glass bottles in the middle of the parking lot. The noise was unbelievable, the boss was shouting at him, the employee flipped him the bird, went into the office, and collected his check. It was unfreaking believable. Summer job at landscaping. The job required us to take company trucks to the houses and businesses whose lands were to be scaped. I'd only been there for the summer, but the guy who quit was a full-timer of 4 years. One day he accidentally went to a wrong address. "Hey, free flower bed touch-up," and the boss calls him threatening to make him pay. He's in an adjacent town at the time, so he calls his girlfriend to pick him up, leaves the truck where it is, calls the boss, quits, and tells him to go and get his truck. A technician we used to have partially owned an adult club. He came in one morning, ripped out of his gourd in a limo. 3 of the girls who worked for him were there also. He got out of the limo, climbed up onto his toolbox in underwear and cowboy boots only, dancing like crazy. Tells most of the management to get lost, climbs back down and leaves. Needless to say, we hired him back 4 years later. My boss told me that by the end of the day I had to submit the name of one of my 3 employees to be laid off. After discussing with my girlfriend on the phone, I wrote my own name down on a piece of paper and handed it to my boss. The look on his face was priceless. I worked at a bar when I was younger. Actually, I was a minor, but I needed to work, and bartending was one of the few jobs that had a schedule that allowed me to go to school at the same time. The 40-something-year-old owner constantly harassed me. I don't mean flirtations or passes, I mean asking me to suck his eggplant, commenting on my juicy meld, and slapping my butt. Real Romeo. He He even had an apartment above the bar. I couldn't complain to labor standards because I was working under the table, being underage and all. Anyway, fortunately I had the fortitude to say no and keep myself safe from him, but after a while he became harder to dodge and I couldn't handle other things that were going on at the bar, so I decided to quit. On the night I decided was my last, I didn't charge any customer, mostly regulars, for any of their booze. Ended up giving away a couple of $1,000 in alcohol on the house, and pocketing some pretty generous tips. In the same way, I couldn't report him, he couldn't report me. So in the end, I felt it was a pretty fair FU. In conclusion, boss at a bar was a creep, so I gave out a bunch of booze on the night that I quit. Honestly, good on you. Screw that guy. A couple of $1,000 in the hole might not make a jerk like that reform his ways, but at least you hit him where it hurts. My first day at a new chain convenience store, graveyard shift. I show up, no uniform. Old chain was bought out by a new chain, and the clerk is nowhere to be found. The parking lot is full of people loading store products into their cars. The most epic was a lady with a trunk full of Huggies, and every 40-ounce beer bottle the store had left. My first thought was that he was dead or tied up in the back. I looked around for him and couldn't find him. For all I knew, he could have been one of the people emptying the store out. I went behind the counter and the cash register was empty and 2 guys are working hacksaws on the safe under the counter. It took me a while to go through the paperwork thrown everywhere until I found the store manager's phone number. I called him up. Now that I think about it, I'm surprised the phone was still there, and he says to call the police. He's on his way. I told the 2 guys working the safe I was calling the cops, and just as casual as you please, they got up and walked out, announcing to everyone what was happening. They all just casually left. Everyone got out of there before the cops and the manager showed up, and that's when I noticed the door. There was a sign taped to it. It said, "Clerk just quit, the store is unattended, take what you want." I spent the rest of the shift helping the manager clean up and basically only sold gas the rest of the week while waiting on new inventory to come in. I worked at a pipe drilling company. They issued a substance test. He told me he was accused of cheating, so he got upset, undid his overalls and with nothing underneath, proceeded to talk Ace Ventura style out of his butthole, saying that he would never cheat, then stood up and whipped his eggplant around lasso style, followed by a move we now call the peeing helicopter. Managed to fill the test cup. 13-panel test and he was positive for 12. The woman giving the test had 1 week to go before retiring but said it didn't matter and quit right then and there, and left a little less dry than when she'd come in. In conclusion, spinning around and peeing gets you fired. I used to work at this restaurant, and one day I got a frantic call from my boss, asking me if I could come in and work. Apparently the cashier and the sushi chef, who were dating, just flat out left. The only other people working there were the cooks, and they had no idea they were gone until a good half hour or so later. I thought it was pretty ballsy and stupid of them to just leave the restaurant unattended. Someone could have easily stolen one of the TVs, money from the register, or even stuff from the sushi bar. My Spanish teacher once told me a great story about how he quit his telemarketing job. He was in college at our crappy community college and just decided to stop going to work. He went back 6 months later, acted like he'd done nothing wrong and they didn't notice. He never went to work at the telemarketing center ever again. A year after, they called him and told him it wasn't working out. I'm a lifeguard. At our facility, we have certain whistle signals that we use to signify certain things. Well, one of those signals was one that meant spinal injury, and not just some, "oh, he's got whiplash" kind of thing, like, "oh crap, his spine is broken." Anyway, this guy apparently had had enough of working in our water park and decided to just leave his stand in the middle of his shift while blowing that signal on his whistle. Paramedics were called, and by the time they arrived, he was long gone. It was quite an interesting day. A couple of years ago, my friends and I sat at the Rhine and we were having a great time. It was a hot summer day and we had a little barbecue. On the Rhine, there are a lot of tourist boats cruising up and down between Koblenz and Cologne. We sat there and suddenly we heard a loud splash from one of the smaller boats that was approaching us. It was a guy who jumped off the boat and swam to the shore, got out of the water and walked away. Later, I read in the newspaper that this was an employee who'd had enough. Still brings a smile to my face. I worked in an office, and one guy collected all of the little round paper discs from whenever we used the 3-hole punch. He put them all into an empty coffee can, almost full, and then he rage quit after a dispute with the boss and flung that can, full of tiny paper discs, all over the office like confetti. It's been over a year since he left, and we're still picking those things up. No joking, an employee came to work with a Glock and domed himself in the parking lot.
What nerve! Didn't even give his 2-week notice.
My friend worked at a popular fast food chain. Their policy was to throw out food that was left by the end of the day. The manager was a huge jerk and was being even worse on this particular day. He also refused to give my friend his overtime pay. A few hours before closing time, my friend grabbed 2 bags and stuffed with burgers and chicken. His co-workers were in on this. He walked home while handing out food to homeless people. Oh, and he wrote, "You're a prick" on the manager's MacBook with a Sharpie. What are some very comforting facts? In Switzerland, it's illegal to own just one guinea pig because they're very social animals. It's considered animal abuse to only have one. Oh, my heart. Crows and ravens love to play in the snow. One of their favorite activities is rolling down hills. Scientists in 2020 made a massive breakthrough in curing blindness, like verging on a cure. It was masked by the virus headlines, though. If I'm not mistaken, it was with children who had been blind since birth, under the age of 10 anyway, but still. All those embarrassing and cringy moments that come flooding into your mind when you least expect them, nobody else remembers them, and every last one of us has them. It's part of this complicated process called living. While you're busy remembering yours, everyone else is remembering their own. It's in the past. Nothing you can do right now can make it any better. Chalk it up as a lesson and reap the experience. About 65% of America's aluminum is currently recycled. Every minute, an average of 123,097 aluminium cans are recycled. On average, Americans recycle 2 out of every 3 aluminum cans they use. The average aluminum can contains more than 50% post-consumer recycled aluminum. It's just aluminum, but it shows that we can, as a society, recycle over half the stuff we use, and we can just start keeping the world clean. That, and a push to renewable energy would be nice. Bees take naps in flowers. So yeah, it's okay to need a nap. Even busy bees do. I too like to rest on my laurels. I grow pumpkins and the long vines are covered in big bell-shaped golden flowers. Every morning I go out and take a peek inside, ever since I discovered that they always have 2 or 3 sleeping bees in them, bees that have spent the night safe and warm inside. Little bee hotel rooms, as it were. Although it's very cold and the vines aren't producing pumpkins right now, I'm leaving them in place just for the bees. If you make it to the airport without dying, you've already passed the deadliest part of plane travel. Cows have best friends. So do horses. They work significantly harder when together, and they tend to scare less easily. Now that I think about it, most mammal pets and domesticated animals that I've been aware of have often ended up having one friend that they've become closer to, and it's always adorable, so that's great. Swedish blood donors receive a text whenever their blood is used to help someone. So do Australians. And folks from the UK. Some fish like to be pet. Clownfish are attracted to people. I went snorkeling around some reefs, and after wiggling your fingers at them like a worm, they come swim up to you and swam between my fingers. All of the cardigans Mr. Rogers wore on camera were knit by his mother. Mr. Rogers' facts are the most wholesome facts. His favorite number was 143 because the words, "I love you" have 1, 4, and 3 letters. There's a lighthouse in Massachusetts that blinks 143 and is known as the I Love You Lighthouse. Minot's Ledge in Cohasset. Your body is home to its own unique ecosystem, the human gut. It sounds gross, but billions of little creatures living inside you are helping you digest things, dispose of waste, and survive natural toxins in the food you consume. If you ever feel like you're useless or that your existence means nothing, that's not true. You literally mean the world to your gut flora. Goldfish can recognize their owners. Damn, he's been watching you this whole time and you didn't even know. I used to have a goldfish who would suck up a piece of stone and spit it against the glass to make a noise, so I'd know that he wanted to be fed. The darn fish trained me. There's a volunteer organization called No One Dies Alone. You're at a Sacred Hearts medical center, you're terminal, and you need a companion. From someone to talk to or just someone to hold your hand, they'll make sure someone will be there for you. Other hospitals have this too. In dog or wolf movies where they use real-life dog actors, the film's editors sometimes have to add CGI tails because the dogs can't stop wagging their tails because they're so happy. I used to have a sweetheart of a dog who loved to roughhouse. She was big and her play growls sounded scary if you didn't know how gentle she really was. Ever since her, when I see attack dogs on screen, I noticed they often have the same body language and tone that she had. Otters hold each other's hands when they sleep so their mate won't drift away. Dogs make cute little sneezing sounds to tell you they're playing and not fighting. Jupiter's gravitational mass is so immense, modern science believe it's been protecting us from meteors for millions of years.
Thank you, Jupiter.
You're welcome, Jupiter 2020. It's highly likely your pet dreams of you in their sleep. Stan Lee started creating the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Iron Man, etc. at around 40. So even if you think that you can't get anything out of your life, you can still push yourself creatively and leave a lasting impact on the world at an older age. I used to be a caregiver at a retirement home. I took care of a lady who started painting when she was 60 and kind of had an accidental career. She sold lots of paintings to hotels and in street fairs. She had a 20-year run as a painter. Wow, that's wonderful. There are many examples when people changed their careers late in their lives. Ray Kroc spent his career as a milkshake device salesman before buying McDonald's at age 52 in 1954. He grew it into the world's biggest fast food franchise. Anna Mary Robertson Moses, better known as Grandma Moses, began her prolific painting career at 78. In 2006, one of her paintings sold for $1.2 million. Previously, she was a housekeeper and farm laborer. Larry David got his start as a writer for Saturday Night Live when he was in his late 30s, but he wasn't exactly successful. As he told Vanity Fair, "The sketches would get cut. I only had one sketch on the entire year." Then when he turned 42, he co-created Seinfeld, and the rest is TV sitcom history. Harrison Ford was a carpenter until his late 30s. Age is no barrier to do what interests you. It's never too late to start again. Pillow fighting is a real recognized sport in Canada. It was founded in Toronto in 2004 by the Pillow Fighting League.
I want this on ESPN right the frick now.
It's on ESPN 8, the ACO. Scientists have discovered that rats love playing hide-and-seek and squeal with joy when finding or being found.
I've always wanted a pet rat. This made me want one even more.
Make sure to get multiple. They need rat buddies or they get depressed. I have 2 and they are very charming fellows. Smiling is actually contagious. When out and about, if you think someone's looking at you, smile. If they smile too, they were probably looking at you.
Yeah, but then if they weren't looking at you, now you're a creep smiling at someone.
Personally, as a person in Northern Europe, I found that smiling and patting the seat next to one on public transport is a great way to make people look anywhere but at you, and to guarantee that that seat will remain free. My boyfriend has a panic and anxiety disorder. Whenever he gets a panic attack, one of our cats will sit on him and purr loudly. It always comforts him and calms him down. We always joke that she's our little support animal. She's very attuned to our emotions and feelings. When my grandmother passed away and I was very sad, she would not leave me alone. She would just sit next to me in silence or occasionally let out a small mew to inform me she was still there. So, as a conclusion, even if you are having a crap day, your pet still loves you.
I heard cat purrs are the perfect frequency to encourage healing. Also, cats secrete a hormone which makes humans happy. That's a very good cat.
When they're injured, they'll also sometimes purr for this reason, to heal themselves. 1. A penguin was once knighted in Norway. 2. Blind people can smile even though they've never seen one. It's just human nature. 3. The voice actors of Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse got married in real life. A knighted penguin that holds the rank of brigadier lives in Edinburgh Zoo. He was actually promoted in 2016. The French actors of Marge and Homer Simpson also got married. Admitting you're wrong is not a show of weakness. It's a necessary step to become better. Liechtenstein once deployed 80 men for protecting the border against Austria. Despite their worries, they saw exactly 0 combat. When they called it a day, they returned home, with 81 men, because an Italian bloke bumped into them and wanted to come and live in Liechtenstein. They literally made a friend on the way. But the real Homeland Defense was the friend they made along the way. An Eider Down comforter by Matuk sells for over $16,000. Eider Down is harvested by collecting it from the eider's nest, making it the only down product that doesn't result in harm to the bird.
I don't know, if I was an eider bird, I'd be pretty teed off if someone kept nicking my bed every time I left it alone for a minute.
The people who harvest the nest keep a schedule so they only nick a nest a bird is done with, since birds typically only use the nest during mating, egg care, and chick seasons. So, when a human just leaves their old mattress out on the sidewalk, it's trashy, but when a bird does it, it's $16,000. Think of all the worst days in your life. You've made it through every single one of them, and you're still going strong. There's always another day on the other side. A group of pugs is called a grumble. If you've lost someone and you feel like they are completely gone from your life, think about the impact they had on you and on your loved ones, on others, and think about how that impact continues to live on throughout all of life. That impact won't die with them either. The chain of life goes on. Existing is hard, but most things around you are also alive and going through their own cycles. So in this way, you're in this together. Malala Yousafzai, the girl who was shot in the head by the Taliban for insisting on going to school, completed her final exams in the University of Oxford several years ago. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Whenever I've experienced heartbreak or something scary or intimidating, I remind myself I'm not the first person to have ever gone through, and for some reason I always find it comforting. I'm not the first person to be scared or sad, and thousands of others have gotten through what I'm going through, and if they can get through it, why can't I? I'm stating that this is something I find comforting when I'm needing to cope. It doesn't mean it will work for everyone, and I don't view it as others have gone through this, so my feelings are not valid. It's more of thousands of other people have felt this way before, and if they can figure out how to cope with it or navigate or heal from it, then why can't I? This is just one of the many tools I have in my coping toolbox that I use. It's me telling myself, if other people can figure out how to get through this situation and experience, then I can too. I'm just drawing inspiration from others. Reddit isn't the worst thing you could be doing.
Can you tell my parents? Thanks.
You're not as bad or troubled as you paint yourself to be in your head. I sure hope so. No one remembers all the stupid crap you did as a teenager. If you cringe at something you did when you were younger, then that's because you've matured far enough to know that you were being stupid back then. I find it comforting to know that the very reason I feel bad is that I've stopped being that bad. Everyone has crapped their pants at least once.
That's some real crap.
I know that it's true because, babies, but now I genuinely wonder if there are people who have never crapped their pants in their entire adult lives. I mean, there have been a whole bunch of people in the history of this world. Did anyone hit that lifetime achievement? What age should we say the competition starts from? Age 6? Given all the atoms in the universe are recycled in various ways, having formed in the first stars, our entire body has already experienced billions of years of each atom's own personal history. Even more comforting, it's plausible those atoms will eventually become part of someone else in the future, and will continue to exist in various forms, transforming continuously until the end of time itself. So in a way, we're connected to something absolutely eternal, and our ultimate fate is to be spread across the stars. Hell, depending how deep you want to get, there's also a tiny, tiny chance that your pattern of DNA will form entirely by chance again, creating someone that is biologically you, but with a whole new memory, experiences, and history. Basically, everyone and everything is connected. The best part? None of this is based on religion or wishful thinking. It's actual established and current scientific fact. No matter how anxious you feel you are, no matter how ridden by fear you feel you are, every single one of us is the genetic survivor of hundreds of thousands of years of survivors. Each one of us came from a line of people who made the next correct, intuitive move, survived incredibly difficult things, and were able to pass their genes on. So almost to the biological level, you can relax into a trust that when the moment comes, where you will be faced with the biggest challenge, you'll be able to draw on a deep reservoir of shared human consciousness that will say, now it's time to make the next move, and we can do this. Elizabeth Gilbert. Van Gogh didn't start painting until his late 20s. Samuel L. Jackson didn't even get his first big role until his 40s. It's never too late to be who you might have been.
It should be mentioned that Van Gogh sold only one painting in his whole life.
Technically, Van Gogh sold hundreds of paintings in his lifetime, just not his own. He used to work for an art dealer. Huh. America had a black president for longer than the Confederacy existed.
I like this. I'm comforted.
Hey, I'm seeing how you're getting some comments from non-Americans about this. As an Australian, I know most of my fellow Aussies I talked to were really gosh darn impressed that happened. Your dog loves you. People see you as 20% more attractive than you see yourself as. And a lot of people need to hear this. Like, it breaks my heart that people don't believe they're good looking, when in reality, you are a gorgeous son of a witch. I know, for all of you saying 20% of 0 is still 0, screw you. Love yourself and accept yourself. If not, I'll make you love yourself. During the Second World War, a Muslim man once owned a mosque in Paris. After France got captured by the Germans, the French Jews were being killed. The Muslim man offered every Jew he could find shelter in his mosque, and handed out fake Muslim certificates so they wouldn't be questioned. He saved over 400 lives. No one's your enemy except the ones you make yourself believe are. Cats will slow blink at you to give you kisses. The desert rain frog is a thing, and if you don't know what it is, go and look at it. It's amazing. If you're ever feeling lonely, remember, there are billions of cells in your body and all they care about is you. Most of them are bacteria. Well, they're still essential. No one is judging you. They're too busy worrying if they themselves are being judged. I'm judging you. I set aside a short period every afternoon and judge everyone for 45 minutes. My country is pushing for a series of laws that would make ecocide, the destruction of the ecosystem, a punishable crime. Since animals have evolved next to humans for thousands of years, they've learned to show their feelings towards us. Dogs will wag their tails, lick you, step on your feet and press their body against your legs and lie on you, all in an effort to show affection and be as close as physically possible to you. Cats make eye contact and slowly blink at you to say, I am comfortable, I am pleased. They headbutt you as their form of a hug, and they groom you as they would a kitten to care for you. They rub their scent on you to say, this is my human, all mine, and it reassures them of your bond. Cows will also groom you and enjoy being pet as it's relaxing and they truly trust you. Also, elephants get excited and happy looking at humans because we are to them as dogs are to us. They think we're cute and want to play and pet us. You will always have a second chance as long as you still want to get better. Rats are ticklish. You can tell whether a newborn baby is sick or not by looking at the color of the mother's milk. When a newborn baby is sick or has an infection of some kind, the mother's milk composition is altered so that it produces enough immune cells to fight off the infection. This occurs when cells are transmitted from the baby's saliva during breastfeeding. A mother's body is freaking amazing. Conversely, when a mother is sick or injured while pregnant, the fetus will send white blood cells and stem cells via the umbilical cord to help the mother fight off an infection and get better. Truly amazing. This is true. I was bitten by a deadly spider and my body was giving up. I was about to get the antivenom and transferred to major city hospital. Then they discovered I was pregnant and opted not to give me the antivenom due to risk factors. After about 2 weeks, I was fine. Our son is now 2. Everything for him was themed Spider-Man because of what happened. When the gas gauge first reads empty, you usually have 50 to 60 miles of fuel left. Autotech here. I do want to note that fuel is what lubricates and cools the fuel pump. Consistently running it below around a quarter tank will result in degradation of the fuel pump in the long term. If it's an emergency, it's okay. But for the sake of the pump and its bill to replace in the long term, I'd fill up around a quarter tank if you can. I've tried to hold off on the comments of naysayers in these facts, but it also feels like my job here is partially to educate as well as entertain. Take comfort in the fact that by topping off your gas in good time, you're staving off a maintenance job. It is estimated every 10 years the cells in your body will have been replaced with new ones. Therefore, you get a new body every 10 years, making it so you get a fresh start. There is another person in the world whose heartbeat is synced with yours. It helps me sleep at night. Despite the fact that the universe is roughly 13.8 billion years old, you managed to exist around the same time as Bob Ross and Mr. Rogers. It's in our innate nature to love and be connected. If only 1% of the world population likes you, that would still mean 70 million people liked you. The whole of Italy wants me? Spiders can't fly. Let's all take a moment and appreciate this fact. I hate to break it to you, but they can make paragliders with their webs. They can what? Toads can eat bread and toast. Nothing is permanent, so even if you have no hope, everything sucks, or if you've messed up, nothing is permanent. Food can be really yummy. When you sleep, your mind goes into peaceful rest for you to chill after a hard day's work. Kittens exist. No matter how bad things are, someone is going to come along on Ask Reddit and ask the opposite questions to a hugely popular question within a day or so. Don't feel bad next time you mess something up. Every single living thing is an accident. Evolution was just a series of some cell messing up. It's literally nature to make mistakes. Even the hottest people have smelly butt blasts. Many have even sharted. The vast majority of people are actually decent. Also, we don't need to find meaning. We literally created ourselves. Everything that matters, matters to someone. Everything that is beautiful in the eyes of someone. The universe does care. We're the part doing the caring. Almost everything on the internet stays, meaning hundreds of years in the future, we can look back on tweets from old celebrities and world leaders. Just imagine if we had social media 500 years ago. We could just look back at history happening. We have been born into arguably the best point in human history. It's true that we have a whole slew of troubles. These issues are only minor examples compared to the plagues, social Darwinism, and overall pretty crap quality of life that you'd live in, say, 100 years back. We still have those plagues and racial biases and hatred, but we're lucky that we're alive in a time where over the past century so many strives towards equality have been made. Except for black licorice. We're unfortunately still in that era. An average person living in the developed world today lives better than a Roman emperor. Think about it. We have the entirety of human knowledge in our pockets at all times. We can take hot baths whenever we want. Have fresh drinking water literally on tap in several rooms of our home. Toilets, TV, kitchen appliances. We can travel the globe in a day or two. We can order anything we want on our phones and have someone literally bring it to our door. Even just the level of access we have to things. If an emperor loves strawberries, but strawberries aren't in season, tough crap. No strawberries for Emperor Pouty. I can buy strawberries whenever I want. Julius Caesar would envy us. Also, you shut your filthy mouth. Licorice is delicious. What's the greatest? Fine, I'll do it myself. In history. Canadian soldier Leo Major and his friend Willie Arsenault were scouting a Dutch town called Zwolle that had been captured by Germans in World War II. On this scouting trip, the two had decided to liberate Zwolle together, but were spotted and Arsenault was brought down. Major, enraged, killed 2 German soldiers while the rest fled. On the outskirts of the town, Major intercepted a vehicle, disarming the soldiers there. He told a French-speaking German soldier that all the Canadian artillery would be firing on the town in the morning, and left him free to spread the rumor, even returning his weapon as a total alpha move. That night, Major decided to single-handedly liberate the town. Arming himself with many weapons, he made explosions and noise, making it sound like the entire Canadian army was there. Several times that night, Major went back and forth from Zwolle to the Canadian base, taking 8 to 10 German prisoners each time. At one point, Major located the enemy headquarters and raided it himself. He killed several officers and the rest fled. By morning, Major discovered that the Germans who had taken Zwolle had entirely retreated. I should also mention that Major was a sniper who only had one eye from a phosphorus grenade explosion years prior, and had remained in the military because he insisted he only needed one eye to aim his weapon, and that to him, he looked like a pirate. The Dutch town of Zwolle was liberated by a one-eyed sniper. He has several other legendary acts, but this to me was the best. Damn, I just did some more reading on this guy. He was also in the Normandy invasion on D-Day, and single-handedly captured an entire German vehicle that contained communication equipment and codes. After he lost his eye, but before this incident, this motherfricker single-handedly captured 100 German soldiers. He started with one, killed the soldier's friend, then used his prisoner to force that commanding officer to surrender. As he was leading a group of prisoners back to the Canadian front lines, the enemy spotted him and opened fire. Major gave 0 Fs and continued on his merry way, dropped the first group off, ordered a tank to go and kill his pursuers, then after they got killed, he personally marched the rest of his nearly 100 prisoners back to camp. Why? He was frozen and wet when he saw the first 2 soldiers and wanted them to pay. A general tried to give him the Distinguished Conduct Medal for this, and Major refused because said general was incompetent and in no position to be giving medals. Shortly after, he survived a landmine, and guys, this was still before Zwolle. As if his massive balls weren't big enough already, after World War II he returned to fight in the Korean War and received another Distinguished Conduct Medal.
While the Canadian forces were trying to capture a hill that the Chinese were currently defending, Major led 18 men as an elite sniper and scout force to a hill in the middle of the Chinese forces and opened fire. His team were able to take the hill. A couple of hours later, 14,000 Chinese reinforcements returned to take back the hill. Major refused, found cover for his men, and was able to hold back the Chinese throughout the night. I vote Major for baddest Canadian by a landslide. Folks, I understand this might be internet heresy, but is Major more of a real-life baddie than fictional Chuck Norris? Because I know that Chuck Norris can push planet Earth down while training, but he didn't do any of this stuff. Let's not forget that Isaac Newton ran out of math to work with and was like, I guess I'll just invent calculus then. He was self-quarantined during the plague as well. Otis invented pretty much what we consider the modern elevator. Nobody was convinced it was safe, so he hoisted himself up extremely high and had somebody cut the cable with an axe to prove how confident he was that the elevator was safe regardless of almost worst-case scenarios. The safety locking mechanism kicked in and the elevator stopped after only a few inches. He survived. Had it failed there at the New York's World Fair, we probably wouldn't have elevators today. In 1888, Almon Brown Strauger, an undertaker, noticed he was losing a lot of business to the other undertaker in town. He found out that the other undertaker's wife was a telephone operator, and when she intercepted people asking to be connected to Strauger's funeral home, the operator would route the call to her husband's funeral home instead. 3 years later, Strauger patented the automatic teller exchange, a system which allowed telephone users to make calls without the need for human operators, single-handedly destroying an entire workforce. Imagine being so teed off that you don't just get someone fired, but remove their job from existence entirely. Cliff Stoll, of the Cuckoo's Egg fame, noticed weird traffic on his university servers. No one believed him that there was any risk occurring. Ended up uncovering a major hacking attempt to steal missile designs and basically created internet security. John Snow. Not that one, the father of epidemiology. No one believed him that the cholera outbreak in what is now Soho was because of a contaminated water pump. He broke it. They arrested him for vandalism and held him until the outbreak suddenly ended. He was also a pioneer when it came to anesthetics. Queen Victoria permitted him to put her under for the birth of her 2 children. I visited his memorial in Brompton Cemetery a few years ago. He's right around the corner from Emmeline Pankhurst's grave. Both sites had fresh flowers on them. Donald Knuth is one of the big names in computer science. Back in the 1960s, he set out to write the definitive texts on computer programming and analysis of algorithms. The first 3 volumes came out, and he started the 4th in the early to mid-1970s. He was unhappy with how the newer printing editions were typeset, and so he took a summer to solve that problem. A decade later, the 4th volume had still not been completed. But as a consolation prize, we got TEX, later extended to the more commonly used LATEX, without question the most comprehensive and powerful language for creating documents with heavy technical requirements. It's a strange mix of a markup language like HTML and a compiled language like C. It's completely free and has been for well over 30 years, and is probably the most bug-free piece of software I've ever seen. Certainly for its size and scope, there's not much out there of comparable quality. There is literally no mathematics that cannot be properly typeset in TEX or LATEX. Its default style is instantly recognizable to any working mathematician. It's used across nearly all STEM fields, and there are hundreds, if not thousands of journals that only accept manuscripts written in LATX. It wasn't until the early 2000s that drafts of the 4th volume started to appear. Nobody has seemed to mind. Probably the time that Nando Parrado and Robert Canessa decided that they couldn't wait any longer and legged it for 10 days across the Andes with no warm clothes, climbing gear, or food, except some scraps of their dead friends stuffed into a sock. They literally found someone out in the middle of nowhere, Sergio Catalan, who rode horseback all night and then took a bus to get some help. The mountain climbers had come from the wreckage of a crashed plane that everyone had been looking for over 2 months. They needed help for the other survivors who were injured and starving. They saved 14 of their friends. There's a book written about it by one of the survivors himself. Miracle in the Andes, 72 Days on the Mountain, and My Long Trek Home by Nando Parrado. I never watched the movie, but the book still gets me to this day. It's one of the most disturbing depictions of humans' ability to survive even under the deadliest circumstances. A really humbling read, reminding most of us of our own fragility and how terrible and fleeting everything truly is. It's gotta be Aimo Koivunen.
He was a Finnish soldier in the Second World War when the Finns were trying to reclaim land from the Soviets. He got separated from his unit mid-war in the middle of nowhere. He was the one tasked to carry the narcotics they held in case of injury or tiredness, one of which was Pervitin, which was basically crystal in tablet form. Instead of just taking one or two, he downed the whole bottle and went on a weeks-long juiced-up rampage. He got hit by a landmine, evaded Soviet soldiers, caught a bird and ate it raw, all while on skis. He finally made it back to Finnish lines where, on arrival, he weighed only 90 pounds or so and had a heart rate of 200 beats per minute. He ended up living for another 45 years. There is one thing the rest of Northern Europe has learned: you do not mess with the Finns. Yes, they have a funny-sounding language. Those people beat tanks. On skis. Stay the frick out of Finland. Brian Acton interviewed at Facebook and got turned down. He said F it and built WhatsApp. Several years later, Facebook bought WhatsApp for $19 billion. Maurice Hilleman invented over 40 vaccines during his career in the pharmaceutical industry. In 1963, his oldest daughter caught the mumps. He cultured a sample from her, developed a vaccine, and injected it into his younger daughter. That vaccine is still in use and has saved millions of lives. In total, it's estimated that his work has saved 118 million lives globally. The guy who started FedEx wrote a college paper about a nationwide overnight shipping company and got a C. Started the company anyway. Later, after he started it and it was struggling, he couldn't get a loan and the company was almost bankrupt, and he bet next week's payroll at the casino on roulette and won. Also got a silver star in the Vietnam War and now co-owns the Washington Redskins. The latter often viewed as the biggest failure in his life. The giant Norse axeman who held the choke point at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. By the time the bulk of the English army had arrived, the Vikings on the west side were either slain or fleeing across the bridge. The English advance was then delayed by the need to pass through the choke point presented by the bridge itself. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle has it that a single giant Norse axeman, possibly armed with a Dane axe, blocked the narrow crossing and single-handedly held up the entire English army. The story is that this axeman cut down 40 Englishmen and was defeated only when a single English soldier floated under the bridge in a half-barrel and thrust his spear through the planks, mortally wounding the axeman. I'm surprised no one's mentioned Catherine the Great of Russia. She decided her husband was useless, which granted he was, and proceeded to set up a military coup to overthrow him. Even with the plan being discovered early, she dressed herself in military garb and marched with her new army, which had just sworn loyalty to her, down to Peter's palace, where he was forced to resign the throne, all without a single drop of blood shed. At least until Peter turned up dead sometime later under shady circumstances, but honestly, for a military coup, it was pretty non-violent. If saying, F it, I'm ruling Russia myself isn't great, I don't know what is. I mean, it's right there next to her name for a reason. It's incredible, especially considering A, she's a lady, and B, she wasn't Russian.
C, she originally wasn't Russian Orthodox.
Not a very old story. Manji, or the mountain man, lived in a very remote village of India, whose route to nearby was blocked by a mountain, and hence villagers had to climb it every time, and they had to do that daily to get essential supplies. During one of these trips, his wife fell down the mountain. He loved her a lot. He tried to persuade the government to do a mountain tunnel project there, but to no avail. So he went on alone to break the entire mountain with just an axe. He did that for 10+ years and finally succeeded. There's a Bollywood movie on him too, title Manji, the Mountain Man. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Desmond Doss, single-handedly saved from 50 to 100 men up on Hacksaw Ridge in Okinawa. His company was ordered to retreat when they were attacked by the Japanese, but instead he said, nah, stayed up on the ridge alone and unarmed and dragged as many soldiers as he could to safety without any help. Even when he was shot by a sniper and riddled with shrapnel, he made sure they took another guy down the hillside before him. And yes, I'm aware there's a movie, I've read about him before that, and I know he's done more than just what's in the movie. I just didn't want to make a 3,000-word post about the many ways this guy is amazing. Australian stretcher bearer Leslie Allen did a similar thing on Mount Tambu. Carried out 12 men one at a time on his back alone. Received a silver star. James Clerk Maxwell was idolized by Einstein as being the father of modern physics. Not only did he formulate the classical theory of electromagnetic radiation, but just for craps and giggles, he calculated exactly what Saturn's rings were made of from using pure mathematics. It wasn't until Voyager 1 and 2 passed by and took photos in the early 80s that we got a confirmation that Maxwell was right. He then calculated how to take a color photograph back in 1855. This was then achieved in 1861 and is recognized as the first ever color photograph. In 1947, a guy named Thor Heyerdahl was trying to prove his theory that the Polynesian islands were settled by people from South America, not Asia. Nobody believed him because it was thought that crossing such a large ocean with the technology they had back then was impossible. So he decides to build a boat using only the tools and materials available at the time these migrations took place. And then he sailed the boat across the Pacific Ocean, nearly dying in the process, but ultimately making it to the Polynesian islands. Thor Heyerdahl was a bit of a madman. He also tried to prove that the ancient Egyptians could have crossed the Atlantic Ocean by rebuilding one of their boats and, well, sailing across. It took 2 tries, but they did it. It's still pretty unlikely that the Egyptians actually did sail across the Atlantic, but it's neat to know that they could have. Yes, and it's important to note that the prevailing theory is that even though Americans could have settled the Pacific Islands, it's more overwhelmingly likely that it was people from Asia. So, amazing feats of strength and endurance, Thor. Very impressive on both counts. You're still probably wrong though, mate. Juan Pujol Garcia was a Spaniard who created his own counterintelligence operation for the Allies during World War II. Initially, he approached the British and American intelligence to offer them his services, but both countries rebuffed him. Undeterred, Garcia created a fictional persona as a pro-fascist Spanish official and got himself recruited by the Third Reich, who directed him to travel to Britain to recruit agents. Instead, Garcia created a network of fictitious agents and sub-agents using publicly available information, like newspapers and travel brochures. It was at this point that he again contacted Allied intelligence and was finally recruited. Garcia continued his work throughout the war, and for the same operation he received both a knighthood from the British and the Iron Cross from Germany. The Germans never realized that he was a double agent. Yes, in the lead-up to Overlord, he confirmed reports that the Allied attack would come from Dover and wouldn't attack Normandy. Then, at the last moment, he confirmed that the Allies in fact would attack Normandy. But it was too late for the Germans to act on it. So afterwards, the Germans still trusted him, as they would point to him and say, he was the only one who predicted the Normandy invasion. It was technical issues, as always, that meant that the data got to us late. How about the doctor stationed in Antarctica that removed his own appendix? Gosh darn. When Nintendo turned down a collaboration with Sony, then Sony said, "Frick it, we'll do it ourselves." And the rest is history. To be fair, I think it's great that they did. Nintendo and Sony are so different, and there's plenty of room for both. Nintendo occupies a niche that I don't think they'll ever lose. Sony and Microsoft are locked in a never-ending war, yet Nintendo will always have their niche. Doesn't matter who wins the console war, Nintendo will claim second place. The first thing that comes to thought here is the Louisiana Purchase. Congress planned on buying a small piece of the available land, but Jefferson used some interpretation messery to double the size of the US without congressional approval. When Julius Caesar decided to just up and fricking march into Rome to declare himself the military leader. Or how about his Rhine bridges that he built in a few days to cross an army over a river, then went back over and demolished it just because his army could. It's said that the Germanic tribes saw his army do this and basically crapped themselves. Imagine being in some nomadic tribe and an invading force comes to a river, builds an entire bridge, crosses it, craps in your land, and then goes back home and destroys the entire bridge all in less than a week. Henry VIII couldn't get his way with the Pope, so he made the Church of England so that he could do what he wanted. This man legit made his own damn religion, which millions still follow today, just so he could get rid of his wife. A man who was a tractor mechanic company owner made a good chunk of money and bought a Ferrari. He thought that the car wasn't as good as it could be, and it wasn't very comfortable, so he brought his own complaints all the way to Enzo Ferrari, the owner of the company. Enzo insulted the man, saying that a mere tractor mechanic didn't know how to make a good sports car. That sparked a rivalry that lasts to this day. That man was Ferruccio Lamborghini. During the American Revolution, John Paul Jones sailed over to England to burn down British naval ships. He succeeded, of course, and made it back safely. After the revolution, he was even pardoned by the town that he burned most of the ships in. The guy in the war with wounded fingers, a doctor wouldn't amputate them, so he bit them off himself. My great-grandpa did the opposite. They were going to amputate his feet in World War II, and he said, nah. So he went AWOL and treated his own wounded feet on his own. When he came back with 2 perfectly good feet, he basically said, I wanted to keep my feet and I wanted to keep fighting. And as far as I know, he didn't get any kind of punishment, even though he was gone for weeks. I imagine they would have sent him back home if they'd amputated his feet, so hard to call him a deserter for running off, especially if he came back to fight. Leonid Rogozov removing his own appendix, or Inez Ramirez Perez for doing her own C-section. Rogozov was a good doctor, and Perez was a poor Mexican woman. The guy who made body armor and shot himself to test it. I mean, I'd use a test dummy for the first few times myself. Judging by the guy's decisions, I would call him a test dummy. Metallica fired Dave Mustaine in 1983 because he was sort of a control freak and wanted to take the band in a more prog or jazz metal direction. He was also way overdoing it with substances and was known for violent behavior at the time. He went off and created his own band Megadeth, and over the next 30+ years he'd sold millions of albums and toured the whole world writing and controlling pretty much everything he had ever wanted. It seems they've now patched all the things up. The guy's an absolute genius and beast of a guitarist and songwriter. Even as a guy who knows nothing about the heavier music, that is amazing. The author has a runner-up story attached to the coattails of this absolute legend. Also, when guitarist Hillel Slovak died in 1988, John Frusciante was a 19-year-old kid and a huge fan of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He was heartbroken and didn't want to see the end of his favorite band, so he went and auditioned to play the lead guitar. He got the gig, helped take them to the top of the charts. The rest is history, and today he's considered one of the greatest rock guitarists out there. Martine Rothblatt, founder of SiriusXM and an unbelievable polymath, was told her daughter Genesis had 3 months to live. She had been diagnosed with a type of pulmonary arterial hypertension which was fatal. The disease causes too much pressure in the blood vessels leading from the heart to the lungs, causing them to narrow and not carry enough oxygen. So Rothblatt quit all of her other work and went to the library to save her daughter. Even though she had zero background in the field, she figured out a cure and in the process founded United Therapeutics, which is a $1 billion biotechnology company. Rothblatt's life story is amazing. Marie Curie, a Polish and French chemist and a physicist who, without going into great detail, died of constant exposure to radiation while seeking a cure for others, more or less sacrificing herself as a human guinea pig, knowing full well the consequences of her actions. Here in Scotland, we have many Marie Curie charity shops who provide funds for hospices and the like. I'm pretty sure she's responsible for saving my butt and many countless others for her pioneering works. Was quoted in 1912 as saying, "F it, I'll do it myself." Possibly paraphrased. Clara Lemlich taking the stage at a union meeting in 1909 to declare a general strike after the older male union leaders told the working girls that there wasn't really a point in striking and it would be too hard, just be patient and deal with it. So 20-year-old Clara interrupts them, climbs up on the stage and shouts at the crowd, "I have listened to all the speeches and I have no further patience for talk. I too have worked and suffered and I am tired of talk. I move that we go on general strike. Now." And everyone went for it, instant agreement from the workers. The Soviet woman who lost her husband in World War II to the Germans, who sold everything to pay for a tank with the request that she got to drive it to fight them. Go and read up about Maria Oktyabrskaya on Wikipedia. Sir Ranulph Fiennes, after an expedition, I think to the Arctic, had frostbitten digits on one hand. After becoming irritated and uncomfortable waiting for the doctors to sort out treatment, he went to his garden shed and amputated them himself. George Clooney bought his own spy satellite to prove the alleged crimes of an African warlord because nobody else would. The kicker is that he's using all of his earnings from shilling Nespresso to do it. Also, I thought he was buying time on it and didn't outright purchase the satellite. Here's a notable mention, albeit somewhat obscure. Sam Regenstrife once made 40% of the dishwashers in the USA at the time. He fell ill with a kidney stone and went to his local hospital in Indiana. Upon leaving, he was disgusted by the waiting times and quality of care. He took matters into his own hands and created a hospital and founded the Regenstrife Institute. This institute helped map the genome of COVID-19 and translated its findings into 20+ languages, helping the world fight this virus. Henry Ford proposed to buy Ferrari so that Ford could be competitive in the performance car market. The deal was about to be signed, but Enzo only wanted to sell the commercial Ferrari division and not the racing arm. So Henry Ford said F it, and thus was born the Ford GT40. Enzo is pretty much the reason 2 other sports car companies exist.
Leroy Jenkins! Oh my god, he just ran in. Stick to the plan. God damn it, Leroy!
What's the most WTF thing you've seen go down in front of you? I was a kid, say around 7 maybe. My father and I were at the bank and he goes inside to do something and I stayed in the car. The driver's side door opens and this guy just gets in the car and looks down at the key. He finally turns and notices me, smiles and says, "Oh, sorry, wrong car." I then see him get into a completely different style and color car a few spaces down and drive away. As a kid, that scared the ever-loving crap out of me. Growing up, I worked on a passenger ferry to a town beach. One day we were on a layover between boats, sitting on the dock, eating lunch. It's quiet and there were ducks swimming by, really nice sunny day. All of a sudden, a swan swoops in from gosh knows where and literally lands on top of one of the ducks, forcing it under the water. The swan is literally sitting on this duck as the duck struggles to get free. After a while, the struggling stops. The duck the swan landed on does not come back up to the surface. In conclusion, I watched a swan drown a duck in cold blood. 2 heavily pregnant women fighting, like seriously fighting. I'm talking fists, kicks, scratching, hair pulling. Everyone wanted to break it up, but nobody wanted to get in the middle of it. Maybe the babies inside of them were enemies in the past life and decided to continue their battle using their new mothers as flesh mecha Gundams. Driving home from work one night on the freeway, I look out of my window to see a yellow motorcycle zip past me, on its side trailing sparks. The driver had fallen off and was rolling past my car. As I watch him thinking, oh crap, he fell off, I hope he's okay, a black 4-door sedan rolls right over the top of the guy. And that was the first time I ever had to call 911. One day at college during the spring semester, birds started falling out of the trees. Most couldn't fly, some were dead and others were unconscious and kind of twitchy. Really freaked everyone out. Biology department investigated, and they determined that a series of flash freezes kick-started the fermentation process of the new spring berries on the trees, and the birds were getting completely wasted. All I can say is, lucky birds. I can tell you, I would have saved several thousands in my life by now if I could get lit that cheaply. More stories of blotto animals followed. There was some zoo I visited in Florida where the mulberry trees dropped a bunch of overripe berries and the monkeys in the enclosure ate tons of them and got drunk as all heck. I've seen squirrels do this with walnut trees. The husk around the nut ferments, yard full of drunk squirrels. It was pretty cute actually. My aunt turned her barn into a nice little place to throw parties. Full bar and everything. One night a bunch of raccoons got in and managed to get into a bottle of whiskey and some beers. They got pretty hammered and went on a pigeon-killing rampage. Isn't nature amazing? Saw 2 people doing the deed against the wall of the main train station wall at 6:30 p.m. on a Friday night. The cops pulled the guy out of her 5 minutes after I showed up. So, my takeaway is that you were watching for at least 5 minutes. Maybe they hired those cops to be the contraception. Coptraception. Mine's a very gruesome what the frick. One time back when I was a student, I was waiting for my train home to leave, and as there were several minutes left, I was enjoying a sandwich outside on the platform. On the other side of the platform stood another train and a young couple, saying goodbyes and kissing, and the man still stood in the door as the train started to leave. I took a bite out of my sandwich. The man gave his girlfriend a last kiss and swung the door shut as he was jumping off. A piece of his jacket, or perhaps trousers, got caught up and he fell to the platform, got dragged under the train and promptly crushed in a gruesome fashion, with blood and other tissue spraying everywhere as his girlfriend stood and watched, paralyzed in absolute horror. People in the train were banging on the windows and screaming for it to stop. People on the platform were in absolute panic and some of them had bits of the unfortunate guy on them. And I stood there with a half-chewed bite of my sandwich in my mouth and my jaws wide open in astonishment. I don't think I will ever again see something as disturbing in my life happening so innocuously and within a few heartbeats, or chews. My husband and I were in a mall in Bethesda, Maryland when we passed a Tyson chicken kiosk where Mary Lou Retton was demonstrating how awesome Tyson chicken is. We watched for a moment and then walked on toward the mall exit. A short way down the mall, we see a young woman escorting a person in a chicken costume towards the kiosk. The chicken appears to be splattered with blood-red paint and they're carrying a bucket. They pass us and we stop. Did you see… Was that a chicken? Not wanting to miss what was sure to be a spectacle, we turned around and followed the chick and her chicken friend to the Tyson chicken stage. The chicken-costumed man runs towards the stage and tosses red liquid at Mary Lou Retton, who despite her Olympian status is unable to avoid it entirely. Security guards immediately rush the chicken and grab him, while the woman screams about how Tyson murders chickens. As security drags the couple away, we hear the young woman shouting, "Stop choking the chicken! Stop choking the chicken!" I still can't believe that happened. This happened in Ireland. That's Limerick City. We'd closed up the restaurant for the night and were cleaning it up. Two women began knocking on the doors, asking us to let them in. They looked pretty distressed, so we let them in. They had been attacked on the street. We sat them down and rang the Gardaí. It was then we noticed the blood. One of the women had multiple puncture wounds on her back. She didn't even realize. They just felt the blow and assumed it was just punches, but whoever attacked them had stabbed them with a screwdriver or something. They were pretty upset, but were remarkably calm considering they were full of holes. Pretty what the frick moment for us in the restaurant. Shock and adrenaline can help you cope with anything, it seems. The EMTs arrived and took them to the hospital. Another time, same restaurant, late night after the nightclub crowd, drunk students. A guy in the queue dropped money, bent down to pick it up, and stumbled into another guy. The guy who got bumped turned and bent down, clamped his teeth around the stumbler's ear, and tore it off. Spat it out and nonchalantly ordered his food. We put the ear on ice and called the ambulance. The paramedics lost the ear en route, and the poor guy never got it reattached. Well, my life is pretty mundane, but here goes nothing. When I was in middle school, my family still had a big old box TV. In fact, its stand was an even bigger broken TV that was built into a wood frame and swiveled. So one day, I had an open soda on top of the working TV and accidentally moved the swivel, thus knocking the soda off it. It did a full flip and landed right side up. Not a drop spilled. I proceeded to run outside and scream like a maniac. Probably the highlight of my life. I dropped a McDonald's drink once and it landed right on its lid and pushed the straw inside it and didn't spill. Did that right in school and had one kid see it. Why have none of my many beverages that I've spilled in my long lifetime ever done this? Perhaps I'm due for a few non-spill drops in my near future. I worked at a public shooting range for a number of years. One day back in 2009, me and a few of the employees were unloading the rental pieces from the safe to be put out on the firing line. The guy in front of me pulled out an Uzi and an SKS, both semi-auto, and he broke the #1 rule of weapon safety and had them both pointed up towards him. Long story short, he dropped the SKS and the bolt went into the trigger guard of the Uzi, which had the grip safety disabled, which was inexplicably loaded as well. It shot through his thumb, which was over the barrel, and right through his head. He fell to the floor, but didn't die until the helicopter ride on the way to the hospital. I just don't get when people take weapon safety so casually. It's one rule, but gosh darn it, so many people can't follow it. I once saw a woman shoot herself in the stomach at a public range. Rather, I saw the blood trail, because after this woman shot herself, she calmly packed up, got in her car, and drove the frick away. All while bleeding out of her stomach and without anybody noticing. Saw it all on the tapes later. How she wasn't freaking the frick out, I will never understand. I once witnessed a Mexican standoff in a crowded parking lot. Did anyone end up firing, or was it a cliffhanger where you had to wait until the next episode? They ended up yelling at each other for a few minutes and then leaving. Anticlimactic, but it was the best outcome. There's this older woman who goes to the same gym as I do, probably early 60s with bright blue pigtails. The only thing she does at the gym is stand in the middle of the weight room eating a papaya like a chipmunk every single day. This has been going on for years. Hey, she took the first step. One of these days she's going to work out. In my middle school, a fight broke out between two girls. One of the girls yanked on the other girl's hair so hard a patch of it came off and you could visibly see some blood leaking out of that area. That scream was something I'll never forget. When I was 12, my whole street was running garage sales on a Saturday morning. Towards one end, there were two sales next to each other and one across the street. Everyone was out and about, including myself. I was surveying my spending options when out flies a deer from behind two houses, darts across the street and jumps right through the family room window of the house in the corner lot, shattered glass and all. From within the house, I could see the deer bucking wildly and spattering blood all over the white-painted walls. The father commando rushes in, and after 17 seconds of chaos, yelling and screaming, the deer struggles back out of the window and limps away, bleeding a trail behind it. The commando dad slowly comes back out of the front door carrying his 6-year-old girl. She's pale white from shock and has her father's neck in a vice grip. She was the one screaming. The deer was later found dead 4 blocks away. It's super vanilla, but one time I drove by a topless, obese man taking a kitten out of a mailbox. That was like 5 years ago, and I still wonder about the context. Finally, I got some tail. Just a few days ago, dolphins in the river. I thought I'd gone crazy, but then I saw them 5 more times in the next 30 minutes. I'm still searching in the web whether it's possible. Is it? River dolphins are a thing, man. Google them. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I saw an ambulance hit a person riding a motorcycle. Don't know if that made it lucky or unlucky for the motorcyclist. I was in my car turning around to get into a parking space when I see that the space I wanted was occupied by a woman sitting on the curb taking a dump. Needless to say, I parked elsewhere. Was walking in central London to university about 6 years ago. Just me and 2 guys ahead on their bikes on the pavement chatting. They looked real normal. A city police van drives past me and stops at the traffic light. Suddenly, about 5 officers burst out of the back with SMGs, a rare sight in the UK, and grab these 2 guys, guns in their faces, and drag them into the vans, sirens on, and off they go. Biggest what the frick is why I didn't take the 2 free bikes. Taking the vehicles of 2 wanted suspects that may or may not have had substances stashed in them for all you know might not have been your best move in the long term. Best leave them be or take them to the station yourself. You know, a similar thing happened to me. I was driving to my parents in a suburban area and I stopped at a 4-way stop. Another car at the stop sign to the right of me stopped first. I was waiting for him to go. Suddenly, 3 cars box this one car in against the curb and 4 undercover cops get out. They pull the guy out of the car, bend him over the hood of his car, cuff him, and throw him into the back of an unmarked police car. Then I guess they were calling for backup and tow trucks, since they had their lights going and were standing on their walkie-talkies. I just sat at the 4-way stop, jaw hanging open until everything settled down. Then I just continued on my way. I think back to that and wonder if it actually happened sometimes. My first day in Seattle, way back in the summer of '99, I saw a hipster on Capitol Hill in unzipped skinny jeans walking his dog with the leash handle around his frankenbeans. Welcome to Seattle, where you can see at least one seriously what the frick moment every single day without even trying. I saw a lady I refer to as the Bird Lady in the metro station in Shanghai, China. She was putting sausage into her mouth, chewing it up so it was in small pieces and salivary, and then spitting it back into the waiting mouth of her granddaughter who had her mouth open and waiting like a little bird. It was gross, and I still remember it 4 years later. Riding the train on my way home from work one Friday night, and a small group of college students comes on, clearly already pre-gaming at like 6 p.m. They're talking and being loud, and I notice that one of the girls has some stuff leaking out of the little drawstring bag she's bringing with her. I think to myself, damn, that's gonna suck when she finds out. Not a moment later, she turns to her friends and says, "Hey guys, I just peed, ha!" And without missing a beat, they all just laugh and one guy goes, "Oh, Brittany." And they all just get off the train as the doors open, still laughing and being kids, while the rest of us commuters are just staring dumbfounded at this puddle of pee on the floor now. A monkey once jumped onto my lap. I was in a car in Asia and stretched out its hand. I gave it $1 and it ran away and gave it to its master, who was waiting nearby. What are they gonna do? Arrest a monkey? It's genius. Walking through a forest path at my university, I saw 2 crows taking on a snake. I watched for like 5 minutes as the birds were trying to peck at the snake and the snake was picking which bird to lunge at. It seemed like the birds were going for the snake's eyes. It felt like that scene in Chamber of Secrets where Fawkes takes out the basilisk. A drive-by on a neighbor's house, in the middle of the day, in apartments, while we had a party and a bouncy house out front full of kids. A few months ago, I was driving on the motorway and a car pulled over into the hard shoulder ahead of me. The passengers jumped out and literally a few seconds later, it just exploded, like Michael Bay level exploded. Luckily, the passengers were just far away not to be harmed. I was with a friend passing by a bar terrace when one guy stepped in front of us, dropped down onto his knee and proposed to me. He actually had an engagement ring and held out his hand. His friends kind of gathered around and cheered on. I just laughed and walked around him, forgot to say I was 16 or 17 at the time and the guy was in his mid-20s. Be sure to carry around a positive pregnancy test for the next time this happens, so you can pull it out and tell him you dreamed this would happen because your little family will soon be 3. Last summer, some friends and I decided to go and drop acid down at a lake near where we lived. We found a comfortable private spot to set up camp and began our trip. About 3 to 4 hours in, we start swimming around, tripping our balls off as we play in the water and watch the clouds go crazy. Then, we hear some noises and look over to see a fat, shirtless redneck in jean shorts and his wrinkly, way too tan wife steering a small boat towards the shore near us. We start to get a little worried as they get nearer and nearer, not sure how we're going to play it cool with them being that close to us. Then all of a sudden we see a little wiener dog hop off the boat, followed by another and another, until eventually there are 7 little wiener dogs running around the shore right in front of us. After what was probably 30 minutes to an hour, the man whistled and they all ran back to the boat and hopped in, sailing into the sunset never to be seen again. It was a very strange occurrence and I wouldn't have trusted my own eyes if my friends hadn't seen it as well. Sitting at a cafeteria late at night in my shady neighborhood. A BMW drives up the parking lot and a man gets out and walks away. BMWs are not something you leave unattended here, so it was already a bit weird, but whatever, I have food. A few minutes later, another guy walks up to the car looking around suspiciously. He grabs the frickin' keys from behind the front wheel somewhere, gets in and drives off. I have no idea what kind of deal this was, but if you get a frickin' BMW for free with it, then I ain't seen nothing. So if whatever you're selling comes with a $40,000 luxury sedan, are you dealing in multi-million-dollar munitions chips, or were there just 2 Stormy Daniels in the back seat? At my university, I watched an eagle, which aren't common in my area, swoop down and kill a squirrel early in the morning. It was at LSU and it was a bald eagle. As for the squirrel, I have no idea. A typical brown squirrel, I suppose. It was pretty brutal, but the squirrel was instantly lifeless as soon as the eagle made contact, so at least it wasn't made to suffer. My friend nearly shot me in the face when I was 15. I showed him my brother's SIG 9mm with hollow point bullets, then took the clip out and handed it to my friend. He proceeded to point-blank aim the weapon at me and pull the trigger. With one in the chamber, it literally put a small cut in the shoulder of my shirt. "What the frick, man? Why is there one in the chamber?" "What the frick, man? It's a piece. Don't point and shoot unless you plan to kill." "What the frick myself, not checking the chamber? You know your brother's an idiot." I was driving through town one evening and I stopped at a stop sign. I looked out my window and see a kid 10 years old or so dressed up like a banana. We make eye contact and he starts dancing. What the frick?
Did you check your watch to see if it was peanut butter jelly time?
I was on vacation this past year in the Dominican Republic and for some reason our rental had issues. When turning the car on, the alarm would go off and not shut off. Eventually, we learned to deal with it and just drive until it shut off. So one day we're driving with the alarm on and one of their army men pulled us over. We anticipated him coming up to say something about the alarm. Instead, he starts chasing down a Haitian selling fruit. The Haitian tries to run and the army man shoots him with his M16. I crapped myself at that moment. I saw a seagull eating another dead seagull in a Sears parking lot. It happened when I was 12. On my way home, a strange guy, probably 16 or 17, appeared in front of me. I was scared as frick because he looked very brutal. He then came directly towards me and kissed my cheek, followed by the words, "God loves you," and then proceeded to run away, laughing like crazy. I nearly crapped my pants, but it was worth it. I was at a party with some mates, and of course beer pong starts going down. Now, one of my mates was so wasted out of his mind that he could barely stand up, let alone get anything in. Adding to this, he was the worst at any sport you could think of. But somehow, in his inebriated state, he was getting every single ping pong ball in all the cups. He must have had an 80% accuracy rate or something ridiculous. He remembers none of it.
He was so drunk he forgot he was crap at sports.
I don't know if it's the most what the frick thing, but it did just happen. I was driving along and saw a car ram into the back of a black SUV. The SUV pulls over and the car stops. 3 angry, obese Asian men jump out of the SUV carrying tire irons and a baseball bat, and literally jump on the car, battering the crap out of it, breaking the windshield, etc. One of them breaks the passenger's window and tries to drag the driver out. The driver backs up at speed, fat Asians tumbling everywhere. Puts it into drive to ram the car again. Fat Asians are running into the SUV now, while the car dude backs up, rams them, backs up and rams them again. Fat Asian SUV speeds away, weaving through traffic, followed by broken windshield, jacked up sedan guy, music still blasting from the speakers. In Philly back in the 80s, going into the Spectrum to see the Sixers play the Knicks, guy got stabbed in the chest about 20 feet in front of us. He fell to the side with his blade sticking out of his chest next to the turnstile. People passed by him like it was nothing. I was walking in St. Petersburg, Russia while studying abroad. We were in a shopping or residential area off Nevsky Prospect when a police car shows up. Now, this wasn't an area where cars normally went, so it was strange. Then 4 guys got out of the car, opened the trunk, and put on FSB bulletproof vests and small arms. They looked like SMGs, but I wasn't close enough to tell. They then proceeded to walk into an apartment building. I told our group we had to get the frick out of there. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.